All right, our regularly scheduled council meeting for May 3rd is now in session. Would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Clark.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brinkman.
Here.
Councilmember Cernanik.
Present.
Councilmember Cole.
Here.
Councilmember Stallman.
Here.
Councilmember Taylor.
Present.
Councilmember Trujillo.
Here.
You all rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, then the agenda is approved as submitted. Minutes for the April 12th meeting. Changes? Then those are approved as submitted. I like our momentum so far. Minutes from the April 19th meeting. Changes?
Wow.
2 in a row. Those are approved as submitted. Which brings us, oops, I'm sorry, Mr. City Manager.
Yes, Council, I have one new city employee to introduce to you tonight, Yesenia Acevedo. Yesenia, if you'll stand up. Yesenia is from El Paso, Texas, and for some reason that I cannot fathom, she decided to leave El Paso, which I happen to think that West Texas is beautiful. I know where the one tree is out there. But anyway, a week ago, she got in her car and came to Colorado, and she's got a job with our fire dispatch. Wow. Prior to that, she was dispatching for the El Paso County Sheriff's Department, a very, very busy department. But she is enjoying the greenness, and she's joining fire dispatch. So we're happy to introduce Yesenia to you tonight.
Welcome. Thank you for coming, and we hope you have a pleasant employment at Littleton. And you don't have to stay for the rest of the meeting if you don't want to. All right. That brings us to our guest citizens. This evening, the Littleton City Council is pleased to recognize 10 of 37 students and the program manager of Bold Leaders Kenya 2011. This 3-week exchange program offers the opportunity to explore the principles of leadership, civic education, and community activism by exploring the social, political, and economic issues of food security in Kenya, Africa. The group will travel to Kenya for 3 weeks from July 7th to August 1st. This exchange program is funded by the U.S. Department of State, Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs. The students have already participated in a 3-day orientation where they met to align project goals and outcomes. Upon arriving in Kenya, the group will spend 5 days together before splitting into 3 subgroups who will travel to different regional areas. I'm going to mess this up. Kisumu, Mombasa, or Mount Kenya. They will work with local youth, nonprofits, and other organizations to experience a cultural immersion unique to each area. The following students either live in Littleton or attend a Littleton school. Each is between the age of 15 and 17, submitted an application, letters of recommendation, participated in an interview process, and demonstrated interest and commitment to volunteer and civic activities. And I am led to understand that Dennis Swain's son is going also, part of the group. Great. So I'm going to come down, and as your name is called, we ask you to come down and stay, and we're going to get a photograph of everybody.
Braden Mannert, Caroline Meserve, Casey Thompson-Comstock, Ellie Dickinson, Elise Langstaff, Hannah Poe, Jack Bredar, Sage Scala, Tess Ortiz, and Tori Sisk. Program Manager Corrine Heidi is also here. She's one of 3 adults who will be accompanying the students. The Littleton City Council is proud to congratulate these fine young men and women on being selected for the Bold Leaders Kenya 2011 program. They are to be commended for their commitment to participate in what will surely be a life-changing experience and their interest in being leaders in their communities.
Water bottles?
Come around to the mic so we can get you on the TV and. Yeah, go ahead. Come around. There you go. There you go. Right up. Get right up to the mic.
Hello. Hi. Okay. My name's Tess Ortiz, and I go to Littleton High School, and I'm a junior. And I have to say, it is an honor to be in front of you guys. The mayor. Okay. Who gets that privilege? A student. So I'm very excited to going to Kenya this year. I mean, who gets to go to Africa as a teenager? Not a lot of people get that opportunity, and I was very blessed to have this opportunity, so thank you, Corey. And I'm very excited to be going with my fellow student friends, peers. We went through an intense work days up in the mountains, and I think we just bonded. Those 3 days felt like weeks there. It was just, it was an amazing experience. It definitely changed the way we thought of the world, how we questioned things, and after those 3 days, I was changed. I listened differently. I judged differently. Sorry, I judge. But I was a complete different person, I feel, and mentality-wise. At school, everything changed. Everything was clear. And I can say, I think you guys feel that way too. So thank you again. Thanks for your support.
And Tess, as everyone is heading to these different districts within Kenya, what's the type of topography that you're going to be experiencing there?
I don't understand the word that you used. I'm sorry.
What's the lay of the land? You know, high altitudes, mountains?
What is it? Mount Kenya? There's a group going to Mount Kenya, and that's, I don't know. I wasn't chosen for that group. But Nairobi is a city. It's like the main city. And I think one group is going to be working with agricultural things. And I don't know what the city group is doing. But I was chosen for Mombasa, and that's a coast city. Got to get lots of shots for that, so not planning on that. But anyway, I guess we're just going to be, like what the mayor said. It was an immersion of cultures, just being around these people and learning from them. It's an amazing experience. So.
And when you get there, you have access to computers. You can log on to the city website, and you can go and find the broadcast tonight that shows you speaking and them you all receiving this honor here.
Wow, that's amazing.
And as long as we don't know how long those are going to be available, but they're like forever. So however long forever is, that will be available on the TV. So family, friends, you can tell them to see you all here tonight, and then we hope maybe you'll give us some feedback when you come back.
Definitely. It's my family also, my church also supports me doing this, and they're like, we want pictures, we want everything, we want to know everything that you did over there, because it is, who gets to go to Africa? Like, really. So, yeah. But any of you.
Thank you, and good luck to
Thank
you,
you.
really.
Thank you. Travel safely.
Okay, that brings us to unscheduled public appearances, which is a time where anybody can come down and address us on any issue, ask any questions, give us any comments. All right, then it looks like we're on to the consent agenda. We only have one item on our consent agenda tonight, and that's the motion to approve a transfer of funds from the Sophie Bramley Solvin Trust Fund to the library. The trust fund was originally set up on the death of Ms. Solvin in 2003. She left $400,000 to the library. The proposed resolution would transfer $11,000 into the library fund for various items like the availability of electronic reading material, upgrading software, providing another computer, and various other items. And I believe we need to read that by title, don't we?
This is a resolution of the City Council of the City of Littleton, Colorado, authorizing the transfer of funds from the Sophie Bramley Sylvan Trust Fund into the library expenditure account.
May I have a motion, please?
I move the approval of the resolution transferring $11,000 from the Sophie Bramley Sylvan Trust Fund to the appropriate line item accounts in the library operating budget.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion? Council ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion's approved.
Okay. That brings us to item 8A, which is an appeal of a decision by the Historic Preservation Board regarding a certificate of appropriateness for an automatic teller machine at the soon-to-be Littleton Tavern at 2589 West Main. I think we ought to go over a little bit about the procedures for the hearing. This is a quasi-judicial hearing. We are required by code, section 4613G, says that we must hold a public hearing to consider an appeal of a decision, that we must base our decision on the criteria specified in the chapter of historic preservation, which is section 4-6. The procedure, I think, will follow, unless there's any objections by council, is we'll have the staff do a very brief presentation first. Then we'll have questions. Then we can have the applicants come down and make a presentation. Then I believe we have the chairman of the Historic Preservation Board, which wants to tell us about their decision. Then we'll open up the public hearing, and anybody can come down and address us that chooses to. Then the applicant will have a chance to rebut or make comments on anything that's been said up to that point, and then we'll close the hearing, have a motion, make discussion, and make a decision. Does that sound all right for everybody? All right.
All right, and Council, I have some just opening comments I wanted to make, and then I'll turn it over to Dennis Swain. As you've already heard, the applicant, the tavern in this case, is appealing a denial of a certificate of appropriateness from the HPB board. The appeal is brought under section 4-6-13G, and I do have a copy of that appeal letter with me if council would like to see that, but that does establish jurisdiction for the council to hear the appeal. And in this case, the council is permitted to hear any evidence that it deems relevant to making a decision. However, as the mayor previously stated, that decision must be based upon criteria in the code, and therefore any testimony that's offered must be related to the criteria. Council, during this hearing, will need to make an interpretation as to which criteria applies. As you have in your packet, the applicant has argued that because this property is in the district but is not a historic landmark, it must only comply with section 4-6-13C. This section requires the proposed development to be visually compatible with development on adjacent properties, and compatible is defined as consistent with, harmonious with, and or enhances the mixture of complementary architectural styles, either of the architecture of an individual structure or the character of surrounding structures. But as reflected in the staff report, the Historic Preservation Board has applied the criteria in 4-16 or 4-6-13 sub E, and their denial cites specific provisions in this section. This section sets forth 11 criteria standards for a certificate of appropriateness and 8 criteria standards for alterations or changes. So as you can see, it's significantly different depending on which section of the code that you determine applies. Because there is a dispute as to the correct criteria, council must make this determination and state within the decision, and when moving to approve or deny this application, the criteria upon which they're basing it. Likewise, anyone speaking for or against the application would be advised to address both sections in their comments, as either section may end up being the section that council determines applies. The applicant is here. He's prepared to make a presentation. And as stated, the Historic Preservation Board also has a statement. At this point, Dennis Swain, Acting Director of Community Development, will introduce the exhibits, and staff is available for questions, but staff will not be making a formal presentation. You do have the staff report before you, and I believe that was posted on the internet.
I want to enter the following exhibits into the record. Exhibit A is a city staff report and attachments. Exhibit B is application and attachments. Exhibit C, the city comp plan by reference. Exhibit D, Littleton Historical Preservation Code, Title 4 of the City Code by reference. Exhibit E, proof of posting. Exhibit F, proof of publication. Exhibit G, public hearing roster. You have the council communication, as the city attorney said, and we're here for questions.
And if anyone on council needs a copy of the Historic Preservation Code, I also brought that. Does anybody, I didn't know if you'd bring your big code books, but if you...
Yeah, if you've got
we
it.
could pass them out.
Okay. To paraphrase what you said in English,
I said it in English.
people could come down and testify to us about anything they want to. However, we have to base our decision on the criteria that's specified in the code. And specifically, we're talking one or possibly two sections, depending on our interpretation, and that's 4-6-13C and or 4-6-13E. So our decision has to be based on the criteria that's established in that. You can come down and tell us anything you want to, but if what you're telling us doesn't pertain to that criteria, then it's interesting information to hear. Bruce.
Question, I guess, just with respect to the Historic Preservation Code, there are other attributes in the code that could potentially be considered important beyond just the two subsections quoted. Is that so? It would not be unfair to say we can obviously consider other attributes of the Historic Preservation Code as far as guiding our decision-making process.
I think you'd have to be a little more specific. I mean, there is criteria listed for a certificate of appropriateness, be that whether you're applying C or E.
Okay.
Your decision needs to be based on that criteria that's listed there.
Well, specifically, Section 4-6-2 talks about declaration of policy and purpose, which has a lot of information in terms of the intent of the code from a broad perspective.
Well, and that may be helpful in determining which section you're going to apply, because that may be the intent of the code.
Right.
So in that manner, yes. But I think that once you determine which section you're going to apply, you have to take whatever's presented to you tonight and apply it to that criteria.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Doug, can I ask?
Sure.
Maybe one other thing. I want, in as much as this is quasi-judicial, I want to disclose that I did, in fact, have a couple of conversations. I had a quick conversation with Chuck Reed, who's on the Historic Preservation Board over at the Rec Center. The content of that was a couple weeks ago, basically saying that this was going to come before us, got into none of the details. And then I had a conversation with Bill Hopping, also on Historic Preservation Board, with from the perspective of asking what information could he present as a citizen, again, knowing that this was coming before us but not getting into any of the details, and I referred that to you, and I believe you called him. So I just am disclosing that, and for full transparency, and I don't believe any of that information would impair my ability to render a fair judgment.
And likewise, with disclosure, I am the liaison to the Historic Preservation Board, and in that regard, this item has come before that body, but as it has been discussed with that group, I've been excused from any of those conversations that have occurred with regard to the revisions that are included here for consideration regarding the certificate of appropriateness.
Okay. I have any questions for Dennis? Because I have one or two. Dennis, you sent us some photographs a few days ago. Can you explain where those came from and what relevance they have to this?
Those were photographs that were presented at the last Historic Preservation Board by one of the Historic Preservation Board members. as part of the discussion in terms of how is what's the process for the public hearing tonight for the appeal process. And so as they were having that discussion, the member presented those and had the discussion that he had toured other sites and had seen where the location of the ATMs were. So that was the intent. But they were not from staff nor from the applicant. They were from one of the members of the board.
And that meeting was when they were hearing the application?
No, that was following that. The hearing, actually, for the public hearing was earlier. This was after there was an appeal for the decision, and it was at the last meeting, the April meeting, in which they discussed what the process for the appeal hearing would be tonight. So it was at the last meeting. It was not the hearing itself on the decision, the COA.
And I would like to address that issue of the relevance. The photos came up because there had been a statement made at a prior hearing regarding the business model of the tavern. And my response to that was that it's really not relevant because it's not part of the criteria. Economic viability or sustainability is not something that's listed within the criteria to make this determination. So I don't believe the initial argument is relevant regarding the business model, nor do I believe the photo. And I've advised counsel for the applicant that provided that's not part of any argument brought up tonight, that we will not be seeking to, that we'll be advising counsel to not consider those photographs in their determination.
I guess I'm arguing quasi-judicial, and if they made a determination in a quasi-judicial hearing based on the hearing, the whole purpose is so everybody can see the same evidence, and then they're submitting wasn't presented at the hearing itself, then I'm a little confused about the properness of that procedure.
Well, I think they were just anticipating that that issue was going to come up again. And so they were attempting to rebut the issue, but we've advised them that we don't believe the issue is relevant. And so it should not come up tonight. I think the photos were given to council because staff had them and felt as though they needed to forward on what they had.
Okay. Dennis, since you're here, the original district, it wasn't Thank you. Applicant, is there somebody here for?
I have some questions
Go.
first for
Sure.
our attorney. With this, there was, and my understanding is part of the process and where the appeal is coming from, just to understand what it is that we're deliberating on, is that there was a certificate of appropriateness that was issued.
Right.
And that was approved.
For the original structure.
For the original structure.
Right.
And now what was subsequent to that was a revision to an already approved structural presentation.
Correct.
And so it's not like we're looking at the whole building. We're looking at a subsequent modification to a building. In this context, it's as if the building were there. We're looking at the modification to that then?
I think you could look at it that way, and in the Historic Preservation Board's findings, they do cite to a section in 2, which has to do with additions for their purpose of, for their denial. And so I think if you determine that that's the section you want to apply, then you would be looking at it in terms of modifications and additions.
And what section is that?
Under G, there's a sub 1 and a sub 2. So there's criteria under sub 1, and then there's criteria under sub 2.
Which is not one that you've mentioned to us yet, right? You mentioned C and E.
Oh, in E. Sorry, in E, there's a number 1, which is board considerations in determining whether to issue a certificate of historic appropriateness the board shall consider. And then there's a 2, limitations on alterations. The following criteria shall apply to all alterations or changes.
And if we kind of follow some of that logic, is that there was something that was approved, so if we went to section E, we'd be dealing with section E2.
Right.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Ladies and gentlemen of the council, thank you very much for hearing us today. My name is Miles Buckingham. I'm an attorney at Kennedy, Childs & Fogg, but I'm here today for Frank Schultz, the owner of Tavern Hospitality Group, and also with John Matthews, the architect of this project. What I'd like to do today is, with the council's permission, with the permission of the city attorney, what I'd like to do is present argument, make representations to the council rather than call witnesses to help expedite this matter, answer any questions that I can answer, and address the salient points here. If I may first approach the council, I have some photographs which I'd just like to refer to as kind of demonstrative or illustrative purposes. Would the council mind if I came up and hand these out?
Thank you.
Members of the council, to set this in context, on an appeal for a request for a modification or a revision, as the council member put it, of that allow an automated teller machine to be included on the Main Street side in a glass window. The demand Preservation Board, which is a part of today's council communication. With the permission of the council, I would like that today's council communication, which includes our statement in elevation of the tavern with the proposed teller machine, the prior memorandum of the City Council, of the Historical Preservation Board, dated April 20th, 2001, the Historical Preservation Board minutes of February 23, 2011, as well as the staff report of the Historical Preservation Board be made part of the record. Ask also that a copy of the photographs which have previously been submitted.
Mr. Mayor, can I interrupt a second? It looks like quite a few people in the audience cannot hear. Either it's the amplification or we need to get more voice coming out.
As an attorney, nobody's ever asked me to talk louder, but I am happy to do that.
Yeah, I've actually had a little difficult time hearing too.
I apologize.
That's okay.
What I was going through is the formalities. I'd ask that the council communication and its contents be made an exhibit of today's hearing.
Yeah, that's already been entered into the record.
Great. Also, a copy of the photographs that have been handed to the council members.
Okay. I think we're up to H. So H would be the photographs.
As you've heard, the tavern building is a newly constructed 589 Main Street, which has been called a showcase building by the staff of the Historical Preservation Board. It's been designed by local architect John Matthews. The building represents a significant undertaking by the Tavern Hospitality Group and Mr. Frank Schultz. He is looking to bring a brand new, revitalizing and invigorating business to the downtown area of Littleton. And to turn to one point that was brought, I believe, by Councilmember Stallman, the code for Littleton municipality says that for 3-6-2 under its declaration of policy and purpose, sub 3, that in considering the Historical Preservation Code, the Council and the Historical Preservation Board should consider the enhancement of the property values, stabilization of the neighborhoods and areas of the city, the increase of economic and financial benefits to the city and its inhabitants, and the promotion of the tourist trade and interest. And pursuant to the recommendations of the city attorney, let's tie that into the competing provisions of the Historical Preservation Code. Again, 4-6-13, the question is, do we have sub C or sub E? Sub C asks the more general question: does it detrimentally alter, destroy, or adversely affect any architectural or landscape feature? You'll see from the staff report from the Historical Preservation Board that it is a small item. It is built into a glass wall, which has already been approved by the Historical Preservation Board in the original design plan. It is something which is de minimis, but which adds a value to the community, including the downtown business district. Members of the council, an exterior teller machine is open whether or not the tavern is open. An exterior teller machine is open to persons whether or not they are over or under the age of 21. An exterior teller machine doesn't care if you're going to the tavern to have a beer or going down the street to have a coffee or to go to Abe's Cafe to have a sandwich or a gyro. Fact of the matter is that this teller, this unobtrusive teller, does not detract significantly or substantially to what has been considered and what has been called the mass of the historical district. Now, where do I get this term, the mass? The City of Littleton Preservation Program frequently asked questions. At page 2, talks about new construction guidelines applicable. Here,
Mr. Buckingham, can
Yes.
I ask you a question before
Yes.
you continue? On section C, it says, the sentence that you read says, the board shall issue a certificate of historical appropriateness for any proposed work on a historic landmark or any property in a historic landmark district when the proposed work would not detrimentally alter, destroy, or adversely affect any architectural or landscape feature which contributed to its original historic designation. Since the original historic designation was simply for the property, are you now maintaining that that sentence pertains to the new building that's put up?
Mr. Mayor, what I'm trying to do is shoehorn in an inexact code. Honestly, I don't believe that necessarily the certificate of appropriateness is an appropriate or applicable portion or creation for this tavern, but I'm not here to take that more controversial point. I would submit that as it's been determined that a certificate of historical appropriateness is required, the criteria under C is the best fit, as has been stated by the city attorney. And because the building is not a landmark, but it is within a historical preservation area, specifically the Main Street District, it does have to make sure that it meets certain criteria. And as I was noting, what the Littleton Preservation Program and its frequently asked questions specifies is that we look at whether or not the building, the new construction, you look at the compatibility of the basic mass of the construction. And so I submit, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, what we don't necessarily need to look at is, does this metal and glass machine necessarily match a structure that was built in 1968 or 1971, since we go back 40 years? But rather, if we look at the Main Street Historical District in general, and if we look at its compatibility under C with the area as a whole, as it evolves, as the code recognizes it does evolve, does it so detrimentally alter the characteristic and the nature of that district that it's inappropriate? Now, Mr. Mayor, your point is a good one, so let's turn to Section E, which has been submitted by the Historical Preservation Board as the applicable section. The title of Section E is Standards and Limitations for Alterations of a Historical Landmark. The definition section defines what a historical landmark is, and this building, the new tavern construction, does not fall under the definition of a historical landmark. How could it? It was built in 2010 to 2011. So the question is does this building so substantially, rather, does this teller machine so substantially pull down the net effect of the Main Street district that it should be denied? And I'd like to take a moment to turn to the points that the Historical Preservation Board looked to in applying this Section E, which I contend doesn't apply, because we're not talking about a landmark.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Yes.
Buckingham. What you're stating is the criteria I'm having a hard time finding in our criteria.
Okay.
And that is, does the teller pull down the character of the historic district? I don't see that as, where do you find that in our code?
Well, what I am looking at, Mr. Mayor, is as I noted, the City of Littleton Preservation Program has interpreted the codes to say that when we're looking at new construction, we look at the compatibility of the basic mass, and that's my interpretation. And Mr. Mayor and members of the council, I think that we can see this when we look at the subsection C that we were previously looking at. When we talk about whether or not the proposed work here, the addition of a teller machine, would not detrimentally alter, destroy, or adversely affect any architectural or landscape feature which contributes to the original historic designation. Well, the original historic designation here
Was the property?
No. It's the historic district, because this property is not a landmark. It is not a historic property. It was a property that was deemed not to have historic value and was allowed to be pulled down for a new construction to be on top of it. So what we're looking at, Mr. Mayor, when you ask me, how do we look at the mass, to paraphrase from the Littleton Preservation website, is we look at the entirety of the historic district, how this stands. And that's where we get to the photographs that I've handed out to the members. Some of the things that the Historical Preservation Board have pointed out and that they argue are things like the rhythm will be interrupted by the teller. Ladies and gentlemen of the council, I can't tell you whether or not I understand what the rhythm of the historical district means. I submit that it would be inappropriate to deny a modification to a certificate of appropriateness based upon a very subjective term that this council member may interpret one way and this council member may interpret a different way. To say that we cannot have a modification of a certificate of appropriateness because the rhythm has been altered is to make me shoot at a moving target. So let's look at these photos. The city attorney has already pointed out, and by the way, we're not trying to target any local businesses or members of the community here. These are just things that I was able to photograph a week ago when I was walking around Main Street getting ready for today's meeting. The first item shows a sandwich board, which has been noted probably shouldn't be there. But if you look, this is on Main Street. Same side of the street as the tavern property. We have very attractive buildings with glass, large glass windows bordered by bronzed metal flashing. This is the exact sort of thing that we're talking about on the tavern. Matter of fact, that's already been approved. What we're going to be having is, with the council's permission, an insertion of an ATM into one of these windows made of substantially the same materials. Now, I would submit to you that this ATM does have lighting for the sign, but that lighting can be adjusted, darkened, colored. We can put in stained glass. We can make it look like a Shakey's Pizza if we want to go back in the day. The point is that we can adjust this to fit in as well as possible, because when the Historical Preservation Board speaks to the disunity of the materials, frankly, we're talking about the same materials. And looking at this same picture, ladies and gentlemen of the council, we see this sign on this pillar. Frankly, our ATM is not much larger than two of these signs side by side. If the sign is not obtrusive, how can the ATM be? Next, again, discussing the rhythm and flow of the Main Street area, as pointed out by the Historical Preservation Board, I submit this photograph of 2455 Main Street, which shows a storefront with materials that are classic in their nature, which have not been renovated, which have not been updated, but also which are not consistent with what has already gone on in the district, both in renovated or non-renovated properties. The point is there's no certain continuity. And to say that this ATM will not fit in when there are other items of the Main Street district that stand out or are substantially differentiated, I would submit that that's not appropriate. The third are photographs of newspaper machines, as Councilmember Trujillo is looking at. These are items of commerce. They stand out. They are different from what they were 40 years ago or 50 years ago, and yet they are allowed. They have been painted, not stand out, but they are there because they are a convenience for the citizens of Littleton. We would submit that this ATM would serve the same role. And lastly is in front of the cafe. This gentleman, if there's a discussion about what constitutes the flow of Main Street, this gentleman creates an ebb tide behind him as the flow moves down Main Street. The point is that there's a diversity and there's a variety of presentations on Main Street here in Littleton. The Historical Preservation Board cites to Section 1B of Sub E. This is the one that we contend doesn't apply. And that discusses the architectural style, arrangement, texture, and materials. Again, I noted the teller comprised of metal and glass is consistent not just with the design elements of the tavern building, but with adjacent buildings as well. By fitting the ATM in the glass largely flush, the teller will be less intrusive than advertising and these newspaper boxes, which were already in Main Street. The Historical Preservation Board cites to 1E, which discusses the impact of architectural elements. Again, this is new construction, and so the focus is on the Main Street in general. It is not whether or not this item fits in with this wall or this building. It is new construction. We're looking at Main Street Historical District in general. But looking at Main Street Historical District in general, how can we say that this teller would be more obtrusive, more disruptive of the flow than a glass alcove, for instance, that steps out so that when people go into a restaurant or a bar, the cold winter wind doesn't go in? The fact of the matter is there's at least 3 of those on Main Street. That's okay. The fact of the matter is there are interruptions. It's part of what already exists, and this is not going to be particularly problematic. Finally, Historical Preservation District looks at 2G, which is the environment of the property. The environment of the property here is a tavern which will generate a substantial amount of revenue and business and interest in the downtown area. The environment of the property is exciting, with music, with food, and to get people out. The ATM machine will encourage that behavior, which is encouraged in turn by the Historical Preservation District policies, and it'll encourage folks to use the downtown, to be there, and to spend money, which is what we want. Historical Preservation District suggested some additional points, suggested positioning the device on the Curtis Street side. I'll tell you right now that the orientation of the restaurant wouldn't make that feasible, and the other part is that on the Curtis Street side, there's already windows that open out to let air into the restaurant. Those, there's a planter to make sure that nobody trips into those windows. But the point is that if we're concerned about this ATM coming out this far, about a foot far, we already have windows that are opening 3 feet, 4 feet into the street. The point is that concerns or statements about worrying about disrupting the flow of the downtown area are somewhat selective when we're pointing them at this ATM here. Also, to the extent that there were suggestions that security concerns would be present by having a teller on Main Street, moving it to Curtis Street could only increase those. But frankly, I would submit that there wouldn't be necessarily any serious security concerns with having a teller on Main Street, arguably one of the busier avenues. An important question is why can't the teller go inside? Why can't the ATM be inside the building? And I know the city attorney mentioned that she feels that the photographs of the other tellers, I believe 3 of which showing inside, 1 of which showing outside, are irrelevant to the considerations. But believe, because the council member brought up some of the policies and considerations that we need to look at, which include 462, as I said previously, 3, which includes the promotion of the tourist trade and interest, I would submit that having this teller machine on the exterior is consistent with what we want for the Main Street area. We want to promote economic growth. We want to promote bringing people downtown to go into our shops, to go into our stores. It is consistent. Having it out there is consistent. And I appreciate the city attorney's points that she feels that it's and she has indicated that she feels that it's irrelevant. But frankly, having this teller on the outside is an important feature and function for the tavern enterprise. We have data about the ATMs, at least 2 of the ATMs that you've seen in the photographs that have been submitted to you by the Historical Preservation Board, which, as the mayor pointed out, were not considered in the prior quasi-judicial proceeding. But since you can't unring a bell, let me talk about them. One shows a teller on the outside in downtown. Another, all the others, show interior. Well, we chose the interior at the Washington Park Tavern. That interior teller produces 10% of the revenue of the exterior downtown Denver teller. 10%, 1/10. And so you could say, well, the foot traffic in the outside one's abnormal. So that's you can't really consider that. But the fact of the matter is, even if you cut it in half, you were looking at, I want to get my numbers right. If you cut it in half, we're still looking at 5 times the volume of revenue for the outside one, for the inside one. And here's what we're talking about. Revenue that generates money for the city of Littleton, revenue which translates into employees, and which translates to improvements. The exterior ATM you've seen generated in a 15-month period approximately $49,000. That's a couple employees. The interior one generated approximately $3,900 in that same period of time. The fact of the matter is that the Historical Preservation Code has a significant part of its policy and initial statement that we are to promote financial benefits to the city. Allowing this modification would help that portion and remain consistent with subsection C, which is the best fit here. That is, a new construction in an otherwise historical area, a new construction which is not designed to mimic or trick anybody to think that it's historical, but rather a new construction with the amenities of it that still fits in with the downtown area. And we've seen examples of what already fits in the downtown area. This will fit well. It will not interrupt the rhythm of the downtown area, whatever that is. And it will help the city, and it will help the tavern thrive. I've spoken for a long time. Thank you.
First,
yes, sir.
Questions?
Let me, I guess, to contextualize the dollars you're talking about in terms of incremental revenue, how close is the nearest ATM to the one that you indicated generates, what, $49,000 over 15 months?
That is in the downtown area, I'd be guessing. I did Google Maps on the Washington Park one. The downtown one, I would say that the nearest exterior one would be probably the Wells Fargo, which would be about 4 to 6 blocks south of there.
On Broadway and 17th?
No, this is actually the Lodo area. So there's actually,
okay.
yeah, okay. And then the Wash Park one, according to Google Maps again, there's not another ATM within a mile. So frankly, you'd think that that would have a substantial benefit because this is the South Pearl District. This is the South Gaylord District, which should have a lot of, exciting foot traffic.
Does it, these are dodgy comparisons to make. I mean, you guys understand there's 2 ATMs at Prince and Bellevue. There's an ATM at Prince and Alamo. And actually, there's another ATM on Main Street inside Old Town.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's a block away. So you guys, your business model is, and I'm not entirely, I'm sort of respectful of the city attorney's point that I'm not entirely sure this is all relevant, but I mean, your guys' economic model on this thing basically says you're planning to make a lot of money off ATM fees by having this thing on the outside of the building?
Well, it's sort of the converse of that. The goal is to, and converse is the wrong term, the goal is to enhance the business with the use of this teller machine. The goal is to make it more convenient and to make it available for folks that are out on the street, for instance, in the summertime going shop to shop. I agree with you. There are other ATMs, but unless you leave Main Street, they're all inside. Once you leave Main Street, there is one glassed-off one, and there is a bank farther down on Main Street where, again, there's an interior ATM there. So ATMs are available, but frankly, having it there for the foot traffic, having it there for the folks that are bicycling in for morning coffee, having it there for the folks that are there, not necessarily even when the tavern's open, is an important consideration. To answer your question, the goal and the hope is to be able to sustain and support part of the business and the employees that make up the business with an exterior teller. If an interior teller is what has to be, that's fine. The problem, the challenges that go along with that could be, as our other numbers show, substantially decreased revenue, understanding there's several variables.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Buckingham?
Yes, Mr. Buckingham, it's a little bit more of a follow-on on what Councilman Stallman was going through, which is you're indicating that having the ATM, I'm trying to read through your logic a little bit, is more sustainable as far as the value is. There would actually be more employees that would be present. What's the business model as far as the number of employees per square foot, or is it per revenue that a location will generate, so that we can actually say, yeah, I can actually buy into maybe that?
And I appreciate that. And frankly, Mr. Schultz is a small business owner. I don't think he has it down to the square foot employee.
I was just, you were saying there's going to be more. Help me understand.
Sure. What I submit is that the additional revenue that an external teller machine can provide, as Mr. Schultz's businesses have shown him, can give him that much more comfort, that much more flexibility in managing, in staffing, and in operating an establishment. Frankly, it gets the business to a point where the comfort level says, am I going to undertake the substantial cost of bringing on another employee, arguably the most expensive element of any business? Now, here, where Mr. Schultz has built brand new construction and sunk a substantial amount of money there, maybe it's not the same as another, turnkey business that a person could purchase. But the fact is that this external teller has the opportunity to present that much more of a comfort zone, which would allow the tavern to be able to take those additional steps to make sure that it's thriving and moving forward. That includes, on the immediate point, is increased revenue for the city of Littleton, regardless of what happens to the number of employees. But I'll tell you that based on conversations with Mr. Schultz, is that the increased revenue means, that's another manager, since we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars, or that's a couple more employees. It has potential. I can't guarantee you today, but I can tell you that the way Mr. Schultz likes to operate his businesses are to make sure that he's fitting with the community, that he's making the neighbors happy, and that also perhaps customers are happy, and that takes dedicated staff that are happy.
Frank, I am excited on this. I'm trying to make sure that I understand some of this is that you're really not sure whether that means another job or two that folks would have, and I don't know if the city staff can at some point in time tell us whether, when we're talking about a teller machine, your revenue model as far as bringing revenue to the city in this would be coming through the jobs, but increased sales tax revenue. So essentially it comes in a very indirect way because the city doesn't, number of dollars that go through the machine, the city's not taking any of that.
Actually, the increased revenue for the business, the machine is owned by the tavern. That will reflect increased revenue, which will be directly taxed.
Okay. Jim or the city, maybe you could help me on that, because
I don't know. It's a good question, and you would have to check with our sales tax people, but if Mr. Schultz is counting that as part of his overall revenue, then it might be part of his remittance, but, you know, I don't, that's a very technical question that I'd have to
I did
look
call,
at the sales tax code and ask Mr. Farman about.
I did call Colorado Business Bank today because I couldn't remember, and now I found out that they don't still have an ATM there, and they said they took it out because they weren't making enough money, and they had a percent of the revenue that was generated by the fees off of that. So
Yeah,
maybe
I hadn't thought
somebody,
about it in that context, but it could, I just can't give you a definitive answer, Councilman.
Sure. And Councilman, let me just address your point, and Mr. Schultz, I think, may be the perfect person to speak to, but I'll tell you that you say you can't guarantee us that there'll be an additional employee, can't guarantee the plan. This is we're trying to get this business off the ground is the problem.
I understand some of that, except, you know, I'm trying, you know, as I would weigh that, you would understand.
Absolutely.
Second set of questions are around, this is an appeal on a revision to the certificate of appropriateness.
Yes.
Okay. And with that, there was no appeal or objection to the initial certificate of appropriateness, that the project itself was brought through the Historic Preservation Board, and so that there's in a sense the original part, there wasn't any question. I know that, you know, it started off that essentially it was on the dirt, it's in the overall district, but in coming through, there was some recognition that a certificate of appropriateness would be appropriate, and there's no appeal to that original part. What we're dealing with is the appeal on the revision, the declination of the revision.
Right. The tavern's certainly grateful that a certificate of appropriateness was granted in the first instance. But as the Historical Preservation Board will tell you, as these projects develop, there are different things that come up, issues, limitations. For instance, at the same time on February 23rd, 2011, when this issue was considered by the Historical Preservation Board, there was a change in the lighting at the tavern building, and that was something that evolved and came over time. So yes, Mr. Councilman, you're right. The teller was not included in the original plans, and it was, we are seeking to add it later. However, I don't want to play lawyer ball here, and forgive me, the code doesn't distinguish between first come and second come. The fact of the matter is we're working on completing the tavern. I think it would be a great addition. It's hope, you know, the intention was to have it all along. By omission or whatever, it was not included in the first plan. But fortunately, we're here now, and we are first in front of the Historical Preservation Board, and now we're in front of the City Council under the exact same criteria and the exact same standards. And with the Council's permission, I think Mr. Schultz wanted to add to some of my comments. Would that be all right?
Yeah, I have a question, though, and perhaps you're not the right person to answer it. Maybe Mr. Schultz is. The way I look at the code, there's only one criteria that we actually apply to this particular circumstance, and that's the last one in C. And that is that we must find that this proposed ATM is visually compatible with the development on adjacent properties. And for this purpose, compatible means consistent with, harmonious with, and/or enhances the mixture of complementary architectural styles, either the architecture of an individual structure or the character of the surrounding structures. So there's two adjacent properties. One is Merle's to the west, and one is the Bachelorette Building to the east. So, I mean, unless I'm missing something here, this comes down to simply, is the ATM compatible with the architectural style of Merle's and/or the architectural style of the Bachelorette Building?
I would submit that it's a bit beyond the architectural style, but let's move with there, because it does talk about the architecture of an individual structure, but it also talks about visual compatibility earlier on. But let's take what you said.
Well, I don't see where the visual compatibility early on applies to this particular instance, but
Okay.
but perhaps
Okay.
you want to make a proof for that.
Well, I would submit that the board must find the proposed development visually compatible with designated historical structures located on the property in terms of design, finish, material, scale, mass, and height. I would submit here that the proposed development is the modification to include the teller. So that's how I would read that sentence to be applicable here. But in either event, if we look at it in terms of architectural style, Merle's to the west was designed by John Matthews, the same firm that designed this one. The two buildings are very compatible. And inserting this teller into the window, which is a dark glass window with bronzed or dark metal flashing, that teller will, in terms of materials, in terms of modernity, in terms of style, and in terms of lines, it is compatible, both with itself as a structure and certainly with Merle's. If you move the other direction, I believe that's also an updated building with dark glass, metal flashing around the windows. And tell me if I'm wrong. I might be off in this, but I believe that we have a brick structure with dark glass and metal flashing. If I'm wrong, tell me. But I can tell you that Merle's is 100% compatible.
No, I guess I agree with you now that second criteria also applies because you have to be compatible with your own building.
Yes.
Okay?
And Mr. Schultz, if the council would hear.
Thank you for your time, Mayor and Council. I think I was going to discuss how the financial side of the ATM worked, but that may not be relevant, so it probably wouldn't make sense for me to do that, or would you like me to explain? It seemed like that was a question for a while.
Well, part of the presentation, Mr. Buckingham was mentioning that there is an enhanced revenue for the city. I did make an inquiry earlier to the city's finance director, but hadn't received a response on this question, which is I can possibly understand some of the indirect impact. What I wouldn't see is enhanced revenue to the city just by having and there is no direct impact from having the ATM generate revenue. That's
Okay.
That's kind of my guess at it, but you know that's where I'm.
Well, there's two scenarios with the ATM. One of the scenarios would be another company comes and they service it and maintain it. We do that ourselves. We put the money in, we charge a service fee. So that $49,000 and the Wash Park store I think was $6,000 or something. That's taxable revenue that we pay tax on. So that's that. And again, that may not be relevant. I think the only other thing that I wanted to point out is that the depth of the ATM that would be in the window would not even be out past the windows offset from the brick a little bit, and it wouldn't even be out past the brick, just from a visual standpoint. So those were the comments that I wanted to make. Let me just also discuss the issue with we were talking about additional employees, and really it's not about additional employees, but I'm taking a big risk here, which isn't you guys' problem, and we put a lot into really making a nice building and creating a nice operation. And I don't know the numbers that this is going to do, and I've done projections and whatnot, and we're really going to give it our all and hope for the best. But every little piece helps, and to have an outside ATM revenue as opposed to an inside revenue, I've learned over time is significantly more. Hence, it wasn't in the original plan. So it's a security factor. What I've done, for an example, would be my Lowry Tavern store, which is a store that it's not very profitable, and I've had to cut down the management staff that I've had and run it at a very bare bones, minimum to save costs. So I think that's where the psychology behind having, and I don't know that it would be $49,000, but even an extra $20,000 or $30,000 in revenue would be significant because, my managers make, some of them make that. So that's that point.
And as a part of disclosure, I've been a customer at the Tavern DTC on more than one occasion.
Well, thank you for your business. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for the applicant? All right, Kevin.
Kevin Koenig, 5638 South Louthan, newly elected chairman of the Historical Preservation Board. Congratulations.
Thank you. A duty I once served in the past. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to keep this really short and sweet because as part of the Historical Preservation Board, we've talked about this quite a bit. And basically, you have a memo from us, and I was originally asked by the Historical Preservation Board to read that into the minutes. I find that somewhat of a laborious activity that is unnecessary.
Yeah, it's already entered.
As you already have it, and it's part of record.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Basically, what I really wanted to say is, and we've reiterated this over and over again, that the Historical Preservation Board is thrilled to death about the tavern coming to Littleton and the fine work they've done. And we applaud Mr. Matthews and the work that he's done in great cooperation with the board over this whole period of time. Our ruling, and we stated in the memo, really is based on the Bachelet Lilly building and what was then the Main Street Tavern coming into the district, basically considered as an entire block. And we all struggled with that ruling at the time. And it came down to that the tavern, the Littleton Tavern, could be torn down. The land was designated as a historical site, and that then this new building would come under the review of the Historical Preservation Board as part of the district. And that all went through the Historical Preservation Board in June of 2006. Our ruling was really based on that criteria where the whole block was considered, and the historical preservation incentives were included in that whole block to make parking and other things work in favor of this particular site. So we ruled basically as we would any building in the historic district based on that criteria. And that's really, and I think it's evidenced by the fact that they've come here, they've worked with us, they went through the whole certificate of appropriateness, and that's really where our ruling came from, straightforward, no malicious intent or anything like that. And that's really all we came to do is rule on that.
Questions for Kevin?
Go ahead. You. Bruce.
Okay. Kevin, you guys want to, I mean, you've heard what Mr. Buckingham communicated in terms of the compatibility, the mass compatibility. I wrote down the word congruence, but I don't think he used that word. But just the visual sight lines that Mayor Clark mentioned as well from Merle's up the block to the east. Can you state your view of that, or the board, as you guys were considering this, what was the discussion about that issue, if I may?
Well, the word rhythm was brought up, which apparently doesn't have exact context in the code, but it was really talking about the rhythm of windows being basically clear elements within the historic district, and that no such item like an ATM existed on the Main Street district, and we were just trying to protect really that visual element. And I also submit that the ATM, as submitted in the certificate of appropriateness, the detailing is probably not complete because we're just seeing an ATM in glass, but we're not seeing any kind of support or structure, or if there's going to be non-translucent material around it, or really how that's all going to go. So I think at this point, we are not even clear on the details of that.
When you look at the ATM, and it's sort of hard to tell from this rendition, I mean, what would you estimate the percentage of the facade that this thing takes up, out of curiosity? Is it less than 5?
I would say probably, yeah, it's a fairly small element. And we're certainly not I don't think we're really concerned about how it projects out of the window. It's just an inconsistent element in what we see as a traditional storefront in historic preservation.
Okay. Thanks.
Phil.
Mr. Buckingham mentioned that there would be external lighting that would be at the ATM itself. Is that your understanding as well, Kevin?
Yes.
And With that, he said the lighting could be adjusted, so, or, possibly backlit or dealing with some of that. Is that information that the Historic Preservation Board considered?
No, I don't think we really took that into account. It was basically just the ATM itself within the glass.
Because, if you look at the facade on the block, daylight things being on the north side of the block, the facade is well lit for most days here in Colorado. But at night, that could be a different interruption if there's significant light that's being provided.
Potentially, but I don't think we really discussed that issue.
Other questions?
Thank you.
I guess I have the same question to you that I had to the applicant, and that is, it looks like we're limited to, I guess, the last two criteria of C, which is that the proposed development or alteration has to be compatible with itself, with the building that it's in the forms of design, finish, material, scale, mass, and height. And then the second one is that it has to be compatible with the adjacent buildings. And I don't see either of those two addressed in the memo from the Historic Preservation Board. Is there something I'm missing in the memo that's...
No, we based it on the three criteria that we show in the memo, which we essentially looked at this as it was a designated building receiving the full benefits of the incentives package of the Historic Preservation Code. So we didn't look at it under the criteria that you're citing.
Okay. All right, any other questions? All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing. We, in theory, have a roster, which is exhibit
You
something.
can just ask for people that want to come down.
Yeah, exhibit G. Is there anybody that wants to come down and address us on this? Okay. Mr. Applicant, do you want to finalize, conclude?
Mr. Mayor, I will thank you, and it'll be very brief. As the mayor stated, it looks like Section C applies. And if anybody's still on the fence, I'd remind you that the Historical Preservation Board applied Section E, which again applies for a historical landmark. The gentleman who just spoke said the land was on a historical site. This is not a landmark property. I would simply note that considerations and concerns about its obtrusiveness and lighting. The tavern has worked very well with the Historical Preservation Board and will continue to work. We are able to paint this machine, and we're happy to make the lighting as low as possible while keeping in mind the interests of disabled persons and the security of individuals.
Okay, thank you. All right, shall we get a motion to close the hearing? Or do you want to go all the way and make a motion?
I actually have one more question. I'm not sure who it goes to.
Okay.
Maybe Dennis. Dennis, it sounds like the applicant's looking to apply Section C. I'm not sure I agree because it's been through some of the certificate of appropriateness and that wasn't appealed. So, if we went to C, that means that it's not historic landmark, which means that it shouldn't be entitled to any of the incentives. What incentives were applied or not applied in this case?
The incentives actually go with the district, so it's in the district itself. So as a structure in the district, it gets the incentives. So, and this got it's already had. I'm not sure what it got in terms of incentives. It didn't get parking because parking was already as part of the larger project that was approved. I'm not sure there was anything that it got. So as this particular project went forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Well, somebody want to jump to the full up motion then? Or would you like just to close the hearing? Jim?
I'll just make a motion then.
Okay.
I will move that the public hearing be closed. A certificate of appropriateness for an automatic teller machine at the tavern at 2589 West Main Street, as shown in the plans dated March 23, 2011, be approved. Approval is justified in that the automatic teller machine is consistent with the criteria, standards, and limitations in City Code Section 4-6-13, having minimal impact on the historic character of the Main Street Historic District, while provided a modern convenience for visitors to Main Street, and that the council president be authorized to sign the resolution.
Is there a second? I'll second that. Discussion.
Doug?
Discussion? Sir.
Well, this building is not historic. It is new construction, even though it fits into a historic district. This is a machine that's going to go into a glass wall. And I'm glad that Kevin described what a rhythm was going to be, because I was having difficulty with how that was fitting into this discussion. I believe there is a value to Main Street to having a teller machine that is visible to the people who are walking up and down Main Street and to the drivers who happen to be going by. I do not think this will alter the historic district in any way. And I don't believe this alteration will be detrimental to the building in any way. There is no damage to this building by putting something inside of a glass wall. And I will tell you, I have seen teller machines on the sides of buildings. They were not in a glass frame building, not in a glass, but on the sides of the building that are several hundred years old, and in places that are very, very historic. And I don't think that this is going to deteriorate in any way from the district itself for Main Street, and I believe it should be approved.
Further discussion? Bill?
I'm excited about the project, absolutely. And Frank, having you come to Littleton, just it's one of those things I get goosebumps a little bit. So, with this, I think for me it's a little tough on one side relative to the revision to the initial certificate of appropriateness that itself was not appealed. And so I'm a little troubled from that particular perspective on whether C or G, because it is an alteration to something that went through the same kind of review pretty much a landmark would. All that being said, Jim's points are ones where I think I can stomach it. And it's just trying to be in a position where lighting after hours is going to be safe, but not one of those things which is projecting, and I don't know what that balance is, and I don't know how to measure that. But we've got some wonderful people that are on the Historic Preservation Board. I've had them, they care about the city and where it's at. And so, Frank, Mr. Buckingham, I know John is aware of it, that there's a lot of folks around town that care about our Main Street. It's a real treasure for us, and it's important. What's downtown Denver, they got a lot of stuff, okay? Sticking a bunch of things, their scale is a little bit different. and we have an intimate Main Street that we want to be careful about. And I hope I'll vote in favor of this, but be careful.
Bruce?
There's an interesting confluence of a couple of issues here, essentially distilled down into really what amounts to be local business economics versus historic preservation. Mr. Buckingham raised the issue of economics associated with the historic preservation code, but in truth, I think the aspect that's being referenced in the historic preservation code has more to do with the economic advantages to having an historic district as opposed to the specific viability of any one business within it. In other words, it's the promotion of historic tourism that I believe was the intent of what was developed a number of years ago. I mentioned at the outset Section 4-6-2, which is which is specifically the declaration of policy and purpose, which I think sets the context of why the historic district exists and what the intent of the whole thing is. And subsection C of that says the intent of this chapter is to create a reasonable balance between private property rights and the public interest in preserving Littleton's unique historic character and culture. And we're really, at some level, we're sort of on the edge of that. The compatibility issue, I think I guess I'd probably come down on the side that sticking an ATM on the front of this thing isn't particularly compatible. I don't know, though, given the size and the percent of the facade and the fact that you do have to look at the entire structure and how it integrates and is congruent with the other buildings in the block from a mass and from a materials perspective, and I think the flow generally is obviously pretty strong, as evidenced by the original COA. It's also obviously pretty clear that the entire district is not homogeneous, but that's part and parcel of the district, and there was never any expectation that downtown Main Street was going to be an homogeneous district because of its very nature, which is a voluntary opt-in district. There are not only contributing buildings, there's non-contributing buildings, and there are buildings that are not in the district at all, and that's by design. Let me see here. I'm very, I agree with Councilmember Cernanek. I think the quality and the passion that's exhibited on the Historic Preservation Board is virtually second to none. I think the folks on that board do an absolutely stellar job in terms of taking it seriously. And it's not the most popular code section in the entire code by virtue of the fact that there's always been a fair amount of friction associated with historic preservation and people who want in and people who don't want in and what some of the ancillary issues are with that. Nonetheless, to me, it's fairly straightforward that the existence of the district has been certainly to the mutual benefit of the citizens, the community, and most of the businesses downtown. That having been said, the nature of this particular element of this particular building in this particular location, I'm struggling with it being of a tipping point nature that says it's probably something that should be precluded given the small size and given its I'm not even going to get into the countervailing economic issues because I don't think they're really applicable to this decision of the application of the code. I think it's, in some respects, a close call, but I'm inclined to agree that I don't think this thing tips over to the point where it probably should be precluded, and I'm inclined to vote for it as well.
Deb?
When you look at exactly what we need to consider here, and I am not going to consider the economic aspect of this, partly because I agree with Bruce that I don't think that's what that meant, but also because it's not part of what we need to consider here. It's very clear that Section C talks consistently about compatibility. This word rhythm, right there in Section C, it talks about consistent with, harmonious with. I can apply rhythm to that, and I think that the Historic Preservation Board has a very difficult job because they very seldom make developers happy. But what they have done is they've been able to maintain in a very difficult time a downtown that is gorgeous and thriving and attracts businesses like yours, which, echoing other members here, we're very thrilled to have you as part of Littleton. And it is because of some of the minutia and the details that they get into that keeps downtown as a whole working on that consistency and compatibility and that harmoniousness. And when I look at the criteria that I need to make a decision on this, I don't believe that an ATM blends in. I think that, no, it doesn't stick out, but it does not, in terms of the heart and soul of what is in there in our criteria and what I think the intent is, I don't think that it meets that criteria. And I think that in order to maintain and to continue a look and a feel and the continuum along that side of the street, as Kevin clearly indicated in terms of the way the windows look, that is part of their job. It's part of HP's work on that. And it was unanimous on the board, and I respect the board, and I think that they put a lot of thought into it, and I concur with their decision, and I will not support this evening.
Jose?
I'm going to go along with what Mr. Buckingham said as he was giving his talk. He says whether this is approved or disapproved, they will have a machine. I think it should be inside for security reasons. And there's been a lot of rhetoric said, talked about here, and I'm not going into anything like that, but I am going to vote against this.
Well, this is a very interesting application, and it's an interesting building. Our Historic Preservation Code clearly distinguishes between historic landmarks, or what we might also call contributing structures, and historic districts. A historic district can include historic structures and non-historic structures, or, to say it another way, contributing structures and non-contributing structures. It's very clear that the tavern, or what's going to be the tavern, is a non-contributing structure. It's a non-historic structure that was clearly understood by the council when they approved it in January 2007, and it was very clearly understood by the Historic Preservation Board when they approved it in 2006, because they approved the property being designated but not the building. If you build a new building on historic property and then you give it a certificate of appropriateness, because that's required in the district, that does not transform the building into a historic building. It is still a non-conforming new building in a historic district, and there are almost every single section in the Historic Preservation Code makes a distinction between historic buildings or historic landmarks and property that's in the historic district. And one of the most obvious ones is 4610, where there are different incentives given in districts, except for downtown. There are different incentives given in districts for historic buildings and buildings that are simply in the district that are not historic. This building is clearly not historic. It may be designed to look like it's compatible with some of the buildings around it, but the building is not historic. So the question becomes, which sections of 4613 do we apply to it? And the two choices are C, which applies to both historic buildings and non-historic buildings in the district. Section E is limited to only historic buildings, or what the code calls historic landmarks. So since this is a non-conforming building or a non-historic building in the historic district, the only criteria that we can use, and frankly that the Historic Preservation Board can use, to determine whether to approve this alteration is the criteria that's listed in C. And there's three different criteria. And the first one is that it cannot detract, detrimentally alter, destroy, or adversely affect any architecture or landscape feature which contributed to its original historic designation. Well, it's impossible for anything that they do on the building to detract from the property, because it was the property that was designated, not the building. The second criteria is that the new development, the alteration, must be visually compatible with the historic structures located on the property. Well, there's only one structure, and it's actually not historic, and that's the building itself. And then the third criteria in C is that the proposed development must be visually compatible, which they define in a second, with the development on adjacent properties. And that means the property, in this case, to the west, which is Merle's, which is not a historic structure, and the property to the east, the Bachelorette Building, which is not only in the district, but it's also a historic landmark. So it is a historic building. So the real question for me is, does a feature that's 24 inches by 36 inches, so that's on the front of a two-story building face, and it's a tall two-story building because it's the old-style buildings, does a feature that's 2 feet by 3 feet become so incompatible with the surrounding structures or the building itself that you can't approve it? And I don't see any possible way that it does, and I haven't heard any testimony to say that it does. So from my viewpoint, with the criteria that the code tells us we have to apply to this, and with the evidence that we've seen here, I don't see how we can turn it down. So I'm going to vote for the motion which grants the ATM. Any further discussion? Council, ready to vote?
The vote is 5 in favor, with Councilwoman Brinkman and Councilman Trujillo voting no. The motion is approved.
Okay. That brings us, thank you all. That brings us to something.
Ordinance on second reading, conveyance of property.
8B. This is an ordinance of the City of Littleton, Colorado, authorizing the conveyance of property known as Tract B, the northerly point of 2301 West Shenango Avenue, to the City of Inglewood.
Council, I'll present this briefly to you. There were some questions about it last time. Chief Mullen, I think, explained it to you. There was a question, I think, that Dr. Cole had asked about the closing cost. We have detailed those for you. And we did check with the City of Inglewood. I think your question was more not because typically the seller will pay the closing cost, but that they initiated it, so why were we paying for it? And the blunt answer was $22,000 is all they got. So that's what the grant was, and that's what they've got. So that's pretty much it. And so the rest of this, I think you know the background. Inglewood has some, I think it's a grant from Arapahoe County on their open space, and so they want to add this into the trail system. We have 1/8 of this, and so if you approve this transaction and the other partners approve it, will receive $2,571.50.
And I think last time we clarified that this is a goodwill gesture on our part of not saying, hey, pony up some more money, because the project that they're going to put there enhances things that we're in partners with.
That's a good point. Thank you, Dr. Cole. Yes, sir.
Would you explain why we get 1/8 of this when there are 5 property owners?
It's just the way it is.
It was the way the contract was drawn up.
Channeling Charlie.
Thanks a lot, Jim. Yeah.
All the freedom.
Well, Council, I will tell you that at the South Suburban Foundation Board meeting last week, we determined that if this is approved and it is submitted, turned over to Englewood, that the contract that is in existence now for putting the East Side Trail on will be amended to include this parking lot while all the construction materials and everything are already there. So it doesn't have to become then an additional setting up process to do just this parking lot that will be added to the contract.
Any other questions? This is a public hearing. If anyone wants to come down and address us about this issue, you could do so now. You already read it. So seeing none, does somebody want to venture forth a motion?
I move that the public hearing be closed and the ordinance for the sale of the jointly owned fire training property be approved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the ordinance authorizing the sale. Discussion. It's ready to vote?
Vote is 7 in favor. The motion's approved.
Okay. That brings us to, discussing hazardous waste roundup.
Yeah, Council, this is an item that during your 2011 budget discussions you asked to be brought back to you, and Tim Weaver from the Public Services Department will present this item to you.
While he's coming up, I thought we were going to do this after, when we got the second quarter budget update. But I mean, I thought we were going to look at it, but Charlie, I guess, is thinking he's got money.
Yeah, and Tim may be able to address this, but I think, Tim, there's a timing. Is there a timing factor involved here of making commitments if we're going to do it? Why don't you address, in your presentation, address Dr. Cole's question about the timing?
Yes, so earlier it was going to be a study session. We were going to wait till further review for more money later. But what has come up is we really need to decide so that we can let citizens know. We get calls all the time from citizens, and so we can let Englewood know whether we're in or not. That's kind of why we're doing it.
Well, that's all right. I just wanted us to have that on the public record since we had said something different earlier.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then the other side of this is our department will have some savings in salary this year.
We hope.
That we can use for that. So
we hope.
We hope. Right.
And while you're here, Tim, that's where the money's coming from. It's still in the public service budget. Thank you.
And would the contingency be in your budget? Contingency money in your budget? Or
I
is
think
it the
they're just
general
looking at some line items that they think that they haven't, for example, I don't know if it was mentioned in here, but, we had a very minor expenses during the snow season. So I think some of the line items, the guys didn't have to use much in the way of any kind of ice slicer or other equipment because of the extremely mild winter. So I think what they're looking at is through this part of the year, they've got some line items that, unless, I think it's mentioned in here, if we get slammed in the fall, then we might have to come back to you for a contingency transfer. But
from the general fund.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Right. But right now, I think they're thinking that given some of the underexpending in some of the other line items, that they can front end this.
Deb.
This is one of the things that we talked about when we had our Tri-City meeting also. And I think what concerns me the most about not doing this is the risk that we put our sewer treatment facility at. Because when people don't have an easy way to get rid of things that they don't know how to get rid of, then they take other easy ways to do it. And we will pay higher and higher prices if if the types of waste, hazardous waste that are collected at this event wind up in our sewer treatment facility. So I think that the investment in this is something we need to find the money for. And the fact that we're able to do it with Inglewood helps share that cost and shares that responsibility. So I think that, I don't know that, I don't feel like I have a choice.
Any other questions for Tim?
Questions for Tim? Somebody want to make a motion? Thank you, Tim.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the household hazardous waste roundup be reinstated for 2011 and that the budget needed for this come from public services.
Second.
I'll give that one to Bruce. All right, it's been moved and seconded to reinstate the hazardous waste program discussion. Council, I'm going to be the Grinch on this because I know, again.
Still.
Coming up with a budget with $2 million worth of cuts, which is what we did for 2011, is a difficult process. There is a lot of balancing of conflicting needs. Some of those balancing acts involved salary freezes and different things. I'm not saying that I would never vote for or it's always inappropriate to modify the budget or change our assumptions, but I am loath to do that unless there is a really good reason. And we knew when we approved the budget that this is one of the line items that this was the maximum amount of money that we had for. So I'm going to vote against this. Jim?
Well, normally I would support that position because I was the one who opposed the calendar for the very same reason that you just cited. We did go through a lot of brain damage trying to figure out what the budget was going to be, and then when we come around and start piecemealing it to put things back in the budget, I was not in favor of that with the calendar. However, this is not coming out of savings that we had generated previously with the budget. It's coming out of savings they've had in that Interior Department. And I'm going to agree with Debbie. I think the downside to either them pouring it out on the ground, which is another alternative for putting it down the sewer, neither one of those are good alternatives. And having some way that the citizens can get rid of their chemicals, because like Tim said, I get questions from people asking me, how do I get rid of what I've got? And we've got to provide them some way to do that. And so I will be supporting the motion.
Okay.
Phil?
Along with that, we've been looking at some creative ways. I don't see it to be in balance for this year. I didn't hear the city manager or our city finance director object that this would hamper their ability to come back with ideas to make sure that we are in balance between, as far as our general fund for 2011, when we look at our May 15th report or analysis. And that's the hard date, and I realize I think that's a Sunday now. So that we may not get it exactly at that point in time. Given the discussion and the opportunity to do this in tandem with a neighboring city and be able to do it on a cost basis that allows for actually creatively looking at balancing some revenue in the effort as well as cost savings by pairing it, I think is very attractive. And as Jim mentioned, it's in balance with the budget that we have established.
Any other discussion? Council, ready to vote?
The vote is 6 in favor, with Grinch Clark voting no. Motion passes.
Wait till Christmas. All right, that brings us to 9B, which is a discuss of municipal court progress. With
Judge Anderson, your municipal court judge.
Good evening. The personal services contract that I signed has in there a quarterly report that is required to be made by the court to the council. I wanted to schedule this relatively close to the first quarter of the year of 2011. I have provided you with a copy of the court activity report that's provided by Pat Spindler, the court administrator. If everybody has that, I'd like to go over a couple of the numbers in here first, take any questions about the numbers, and then go on to some of the other issues. The report here is divided into 4 columns. Those in the first 2 on the left are for the month of March. We generate this report on a monthly basis, and it compares in column 1 the activity in the courts in March of 2010 last year with the column 2 figure of the activity report for court activity in March of 2011. On the right side, which is I'm going to focus mostly on, are the year-to-date, January through the end of March, again in column 3 for 2010 and in column 4 for 2011. They give a snapshot of the first quarter's activity from the courts. If you look at the total at the bottom of the first break for complaints filed, in 2010, you see a figure of 3,466 complaints that were generated to us through the police department. In 2011, that figure is 2,269. That is a change of 35% reduction in the figure from 2010. So the question you may ask me is, why is that number there? And to quote the city manager, that's just the way it is. I can't give you an exact reason for that. I've heard several speculations as to why, and probably the most compelling to me is that there's been a change in the staffing at the police department. One of the officers who is no longer with the department for the first 3 months of 2011, that was a year ago, wrote quite a few tickets. I think there may be some other issues as well, but that kind of gives you the numbers that are coming into the court from which everything else is based. So we see an initial reduction of about 35% of those total filings. If you go down to the bottom of the second one, which is the complaints that are closed, it's broken down into 2 parts. The gross figure at the bottom is the change in the complaints that we've closed in the courts in the same 3-month period. 3,472 for 2010 and 2,111, the same figure for 2011. That figure, again, is almost exactly the same, about 35% reduction, which says that the numbers being smaller by the same amount coming in, the numbers being closed are reduced by approximately the same amount as well. The top portion of that breakout is the Violations Bureau, and that are the numbers that are done solely by people coming in to the window, and mostly in parking matters and in some traffic matters where they receive plea offers in the mail, and they can take care of those at the window on a day when the court's not there or not coming into court itself. The bottom figure of those that are actually closed by the court or by plea bargain there. And the numbers there, 2,150 in 2010, 1,399 in 2011, is almost exactly, again, a 35% reduction, representing an equivalent reduction in the amount that are going in. The next breakout is the court activity. Those are the things we actually see in court itself. Councilmember Sinanek?
Is it okay if you get interrupted?
Sure.
Okay, because
I'll just keep rolling if you don't.
if I understand it correctly, filed is stuff coming in.
Right.
Closing is stuff resolved.
Correct.
And the difference is still on the docket somewhere, potential backlog.
Right. Settings.
When you say, help me a little bit understand that.
Matters, they could be set for arraignments and not yet resolved. They could be set for a pretrial conference and not yet resolved. They could be set for trial and not yet resolved. Any of those activities would not be included in closing the complaints.
Okay. And so before you go too far, there may be a qualitative comment. If I look at the 2010 numbers, inflow versus outflow, there were 6 more closed than there was on the inflow. If I look at 2011, inflow exceeds outflow, so there's about a little over 150 that are somewhere else.
Right.
To be concerned or not concerned, backlog.
I think what that probably represents is the fact that there were more pending matters that were being closed. If you look at that as a snapshot of a period of time and it's dynamic. So there are numbers that are there before. There's an active caseload at any one time of cases set for arraignment, pretrial, trial, anything like that. To the extent if you closed all those at one time, you're going to see a huge number for the closings, and you're going to see nothing for current court activity. I think that that's more reflective of the fact that there were larger numbers in existence at the time that those were to close out than were available in the following year. And that's consistent with the idea that there's a smaller number during that time period in 2011 compared to 2010. Since that's going to reflect back a little bit on a decline in filings, and I don't have the numbers for the last quarter of 2010 in this particular document, it would probably show something that would be consistent with that.
You understand the issues. There's some hydraulics in the system.
Sure.
You know, what's coming in, what's going out, and trying to figure that out. Just wanted to make sure. So, thank you.
The next figure that I want to look at is in the court activity, and that includes everything from guilty pleas to dismissals to trials and the like. The figure at the bottom for total court activity, which adds together everything, 2,110 for 2010, 1,402. That's a 34% reduction. Again, it's pretty consistent with the difference in the number of cases that are coming in. You will note a couple things that are a little bit of an aberration. For instance, guilty pleas, we have 669 in the first quarter of 2010, 622 in 2011. That's only a reduction of about 7%. And what that means is that per the caseload that we have, there's actually an increase in the number of guilty pleas that are being taken by the court relative to the number of cases that we have. So a smaller reduction, 7% is what? 1/5 of the 35 we saw, shows that the actual number of guilty pleas has actually gone up percentage-wise to the cases that we have. The deferred judgment number is actually a little bit higher, 42% reduction, 90 in 2010 for the first quarter and 52. That's a little bit larger number, and that part of that is a reflection of the fact that there are more guilty pleas and therefore less deferred judgments, because a deferred judgment is a guilty plea that's held in abeyance for a year, and if the conditions are met, it's then dismissed. So it's not surprising that that number goes up when the other number goes down. Next, we go down to the counter and mail-in plea bargain figures. Those are ones where...
Jim?
Yes.
If you have a deferred judgment, after the year is up, how does it get dismissed?
Once the guilty plea is entered on these cases, we generally set 2 dates. One of them is a review date in approximately 3 months. We call a suspension review. And that's a review where the person comes into court so that we can see if they're getting into the conditions that are required. Many times, in addition to payment of some fines and costs, there's community service, or there may be a class, and we want to make sure that people get registered for that and they get it underway. You remember that back in, I think it was October, we had a change in the vendor for the community service, and it required a little bit more work to where they actually had to go out to the Arapahoe County office and do an intake. Once the intake was done, they kind of picked it up from there, got them involved in their community service, and reported back to us. And we get a report on that, and we can track it. And it shows it broken down into people who have not reported, people have reported and not yet started the community service, people in the process of completing the community service, and those who have completed it altogether. So what we want to do is to make sure that those people get reported and get that initial intake done so that they start on their way. And that's the 3-month review. At the end of a year, or approximately a little bit before the end of the year, we do an additional review, because a majority of the cases have a condition for the deferred judgment that the city has offered, that the person have no further penal violations for that year period. And that could be a municipal ordinance violation, a state violation, or a federal violation. So usually right before the year, maybe 50 weeks or so in, we will run a criminal history to see if there's been any additional contacts during that year period, and we track that. Those would then come to the judge, and we'd review it. If all the conditions have been met, then the deferred judgment has been successfully completed, and in that case, we issue an order for the guilty plea to be withdrawn and the case to be closed as successful. At any time prior to that or at that final review date, the case can come back to court if there's a violation that's alleged for hearing on that or an admission, and if there's an admission or a finding that it's been violated, the guilty plea then enters as a conviction and we go forward to sentencing.
So how do you know when a year is up? I mean, I'm asking you a mechanical, clerical thing. And the reason I'm asking is because I got an email from somebody that was in, I believe, Arapahoe County Court. They had a deferred judgment that never got removed, and then that affected her ability to get a job and things like this, which ended up being a clerical error at that court.
Well, in every case where we take a deferred judgment plea, we set the final review date at the time that the person's in court. And it is a mandatory return date, meaning that they have to be back in court unless they hear from us that the case, that hearing date has been vacated. And that would only be vacated in cases where there are a determination of a successful completion. And then the case would be closed out and that date would be vacated so they don't have to come in. But we set that date on every single deferred judgment that we take so that we have it on our docket to be reviewed right before that year time period is up.
So they're scheduled to come back into court a year later, and that helps make sure that the whole process gets done.
Correct.
Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily mean it'll be cleared on their CBI record. So the CBI record will show an arrest. And if you get a deferred judgment, that may or may not be reported to CBI, most likely not. And then the arrest remains on the CBI record unless the individual who was arrested petitions CBI to take the arrest off. So a lot of times you hear from people, it never went off my record. And what that means is the arrest never went off their record. And it will only go off their record if they petition CBI separately to do that. And then CBI sends a notice to the prosecuting agency and the court asking if they have any objection. If it was a deferred judgment, then the response will generally be no objection, and it'll then be removed and sealed off the CBI record.
So do they know to do that?
A lot of times they don't. They'll call the prosecutor's office and say, but I had a deferred. Now, sometimes nothing will show up on the record. If you're picked up in Littleton, for instance, on a theft, and they give you a ticket, and they say come back to court, but they don't arrest you, they don't fingerprint you, they just release you on summons, that will not show up on your record unless you don't appear in court and a warrant goes out, or for some reason there's some activity on the CBI. So a lot of times people don't understand that distinction. So even though it's dismissed in court and the court could give you a certified copy showing it's dismissed, on any typical background check it will continue to appear and appear until you petition the district court to have it removed.
Okay.
And that's a process people often do on their own. You don't necessarily have to have an attorney.
But you have to know to do it.
You have to know to do it. You have to know to go down. You ask the clerk for the form. She fills out the form. There's a fee, and they send it out to the other agencies.
But if there was an arrest involved, the arrest is always going to show.
Unless you petition the court, the district court, to take it off.
It will be taken off at the state level, but the federal database will always have the arrest.
If it would be entered into the federal database.
Right.
Most arrests are.
Okay.
Sorry
to interrupt the rhythm.
No, that's
Well,
fine.
let me follow up, though. Is there a way to help inform people so that, to better, so they would know that they have the right to do this? And
Well, usually they figure it out when they call the court to complain that it's still on their record.
Well, I know, but it seems to me if there's a way to inform, now if we routinely would inform and they forget, then that's their problem. But if there's a way that we could incorporate that, I think that would be nice.
It's a fairly complicated procedure for a couple of reasons. One is that it's not unusual where people will come into my court and ask me to seal the record. And we don't have authority. It's something that's in the creature of state statutes, and it's done in the district court in Arapahoe County, or Jeffco or Douglas, depending upon where that came out of, I guess. But it also only applies to certain offenses. It'll apply to a deferred judgment that's successfully completed. It will apply to an acquittal, or it'll apply to some, I think now some drug offenses can provide for that. But many times what people want to have sealed are convictions or guilty pleas. And those are not something that's subject to being expunged under the state statute. And most of the time when when I've had experience with it here in this court or when I was in the state system, people came in, they almost always were trying to seal something that they couldn't seal by statute. And that gets to be difficult because if you tell them that they have a right to seal certain things, and someone else is in the courtroom and they hear that and they think, oh, well, then I'll seal mine too, and then they go out and they find out that that's not true.
I was thinking, maybe I missed some piece in here. I was thinking mainly in terms of the deferred judgments. So if it's deferred and they keep behaving right, they don't have these other things, if they would know that when that appropriate time comes, that they can take this action.
Yeah, I guess I'm with Peggy here. Can you tell them or give them a piece of paper when they come in at that year period of time, or if you decide that they don't need to come in because you've done the background check and everything, I'm assuming that you'll notify them that they don't come in. Could you send them out some sheet of paper that says, you know, your deferred judgment is been completed, but you're going to have to do this step? You may want to consult an attorney or something.
We could do that. Some of the people that come in are only concerned with having the conviction off of their record so that they can go into an employer or a school or something and say, and answer if they're asked, do you have a felony conviction or a misdemeanor conviction or a municipal ordinance conviction, that they do not. And they can do that without having to seal it. Yeah. The significance of sealing it would be that it wouldn't be available if somebody did a CCIC or NCIC background check, well, particularly CCIC, because, again, the federal one wouldn't change under our statute. And we could develop a form to notify people of that and give it to them at for the deferred judgments at the time that those are closed.
Yeah.
And I can look into that.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
I think that's what Peggy was thinking of, too.
I mean, something that would be appropriate and doesn't commit the city, that they may want to consult an attorney if that is something they would want to have happen.
Pretty much what I tell people now, because it's a little bit more complicated than they think that it is. And
it's not
Just so that they know that they have to do something, that that's not the completion, that the termination of the deferred judgment period isn't sufficient to get them what it is that they want.
And, I mean, a lot of times people don't think of things until they apply for the job, and then they can't get it, and then they've got to apply for more jobs, et cetera. So if they understand that if they don't do this, this could have, you know, these ramifications, you know, when they least are thinking about it. So.
given the type of numbers we have here, we certainly could look into generating something like that to give to them at the conclusion of the completion. Or I mean, that would probably be the most appropriate time, because again, if we gave it to them up front and they violated, then that's not going to apply, and would probably be more confusing.
They won't remember if you give it to them up front anyway.
They'll probably just lose it.
I know I would.
All right. If I just finish up with the numbers, down at the counter and mail-in plea bargain, which is about three-quarters of the way down, there is a difference, a significant difference there of 294 in 2010 first quarter of counter pleas to amended charge against 97. That's almost a two-thirds reduction in that number, as you can see. And I think that's most attributed to the fact that we have had more of the people coming in actually to the court for the case to take the dispositions rather than sending them over to the counter. And that's something that the judges just decided to do, felt it was the best practice, given some of the modifications that we had in terms of the fine schedule and making sure that there was a thorough and complete plea, and feeling that that was more appropriate than simply having them go to the counter, which might be a bit faster. I think that's really the reflection of why that is reduced. The bottom section here regards the revenues that have been collected. The first column of fines.
Sorry to interrupt you again, but on the mail-in plea, I'm assuming that went down because the total number of complaints filed went down?
Well, that would be part of the reduction. Part of it, that's about a 30% reduction there, which is actually a slight bit higher. And I know that one of the things that the city attorney's office began doing was more active plea bargain in the no insurance cases because of cases where people are charged only with the no insurance and might have the insurance but didn't have it in the car. It happens more often than you might think. And they have a procedure now that works pretty well where they send something out and the person can provide the proof in the form of a letter from the insurance company that they were in fact insured at that date and time, that the matter can be dismissed by mail without them having to appear. So I think that that also has assisted probably in reducing that number. Ready to move on to the revenue?
Yeah.
The revenue figure on the top line is the actual fines that are collected. The other costs, including the victim's assistance fee and court costs and the like, are below. 2010, $192,607.13 was collected in fines. 2011, the same period, $141,330. That's a reduction in approximately 26%. So again, that's actually showing that we were actually collecting a little bit more per case. The actual bottom line figure there, $232,590.76 compared to $168,839.85 is a 37% reduction, almost exactly on the same figure that were reduced in the terms of the number of complaints filed. The one thing that is different, I ran a number to take the total calculation for the total revenue that's collected at the bottom there and divide that out by the total number of filings that came up at the top. For the 2010 figure, there was basically $67 of revenue per complaint filed. In 2011, that same figure is actually $74. That's gone up a bit, and I attribute that mostly to the modified bond schedule that's been in effect for the entire period of the first quarter. That went into effect on January 1 of 2011. So, do you have any other questions about any of the figures themselves?
No, but I have a request. If we keep doing this, well, I know we see this, but is it possible, since we have plenty of, I think we've got plenty of white space, to shift things a little bit so that you can just do automatic percentage calculations, the change from one year to the next or one period to the next?
I can't imagine that that wouldn't be possible. That's simply a matter of having that additional column there. So I
mean, because you calculated them all, and some of us calculated them someplace, and I see some people wrote them on their sheet. But it just, if somebody's already doing it, it would just make it simpler.
I can talk to the court administrator about doing that.
Well, I mean, maybe nobody else would like that, but
I think that'd be great.
And I think I don't know what to refer to it as, is the outstanding or inventory, having some monitoring that goes on that, Jim, which is between the inflow and outflow, it's sitting on a desk or, active file somewhere, and having some ideas to, what's sitting out there in that inventory that's not yet been resolved.
Okay. I think most of that's going to show under the court activity section, because that does add together all of those other figures. But the fact that when we're looking at that year change to it, I don't know that there's a way to be able to track that if we see we had a larger inventory at the beginning as we go forward.
Well, somewhere along the line, I imagine somebody knows what's open.
Right.
So, whatever's open, then you have your in and your out, and your number of open either goes up or it goes down. But I think there would be some interest in what's our outstanding inventory, that it doesn't become unmanageable.
Okay. The next thing I'd like to touch on are the operations of the court itself, the performance and the effectiveness of it in the last quarter, and then also in the time that I've been there, which has been about a half a year. One thing that I want to preface this with is the staffing level that's at the court now. In addition to the court on a daily basis, there is the court administrator. When I came a year ago, there were 3 full-time clerks in addition, for a complement of 4 people that were supporting the court within the court itself. In approximately August of last year, one of those people resigned, went off to another form of employment that was more consistent with her educational background and her career goals, and that position is still vacant. It's being filled currently. There was an evaluation that was done by Mr. Mathias on staffing levels back in the late fall, early winter, and the determination that he made was, in addition to the court administrator, it was appropriate to have 2.5 positions, which would be a half position down from where we were a year ago. In approximately December or January, we actually had our full-time employee go to a half-time position, and the idea there was that we would be able to probably more easily advertise for and hire a full-time person, raising our complement to 2.5, than to have a half-time person, because the likelihood would be that somebody, unless they just happen to meet their exact needs, would probably want to move to a full-time position either within a city or someplace else, and it would be more of a revolving door if we did that. This particular staff member wanted to go for personal reasons to half-time. It seems to be working well for her. But because of that, we're now actually down to 1.5 positions. So we're actually now considerably below where our staffing was, at about half of it, in addition to the court administrator even a year ago. Fortunately, we're in a process now of filling that position. It's been open. It's been through the testing process, the interview process, and I believe that in addition to the HR department, we're in a process of trying to fill that and hope to be able to have us back up to our staffing level by the beginning of June, if that person can come on board.
It appears as though the workload's down about 35%. So, I mean, are we going to be overstaffed if we don't see these numbers change?
What I've seen in the numbers for April, since those numbers just came through, is that the numbers are going back up. They're starting to rebound. I think that's partly, again, having to do with the composition of the police department, the fact that they're all now into their new building, the fact that the weather has turned, and I think this time of year we're going to start to see some increases in the number of filings. I think we're going to move back towards that. That's something we're going to look at to see what those numbers look like as we go along. But we wouldn't be able to probably get by if we hadn't had this type of reduction, plus the assistance that we've had from the police department in addition in trying to get the warrants done, which relieves some of the time that the court clerks have. We'll monitor that workload as we go along and see. Because even we're at a 50% reduction in the staffing with only a 35% reduction in the filing. So even when we look at that, we probably still are a little bit undermanned. But we'll monitor that as we go along. When I was in a council meeting in approximately September or October of last year, I notified council that I had about 16 areas that I'd identified that I wanted to address. Over the last period of time, we've had the opportunity to address and resolve, I think, 10 of those. And they included things like the revision to the fine schedule, the revision to the bond schedule, the revision to the court sessions coverage, the community service contract, getting up to staffing with the associate judges and the like. And so a large number of those are completely addressed and done. There's another 4 that we're in a process of doing. One of them was dealing with the court staffing that I just talked about. Hopefully we'll be up with that within a month's time here. Also updating the court file procedures, something that the court administrator and I have worked on. We've negotiated it because we've had kind of a different view on what that should look like, and I think that we've arrived at a compromise that's going to work. We're working towards implementation of that. And one of them is something that will be coming to council's attention here in the future, and that is that we're investigating augmenting the collections of outstanding and delinquent fines by contracting with a vendor who will do that collection efforts for the city. And the city attorney, the city manager's office has worked with us on that. I think we have already been approached by vendors. We are in the process, I think, of sending out an RFP to get that done, and that's something that will be coming before the council here in the months to come. There's a couple of issues that I haven't gotten to yet. Those are kind of long-term issues. One is a courthouse security issue. I love the courthouse. It's a beautiful historic building. However, because it's historic, it's less than adequate, I think, in terms of security for staff and for the public. And that's difficult because within the building that we have certain constraints on what we can do. The ADA adds some additional constraints on what we can do. I've talked with other members of the city trying to propose some ideas that we can get to give some more security to the staff. There's some public areas, I mean, there's a hallway that's totally open to the public. We don't have the ability right now to have some kind of a metal detector that would prevent somebody from coming into the building with a firearm or a knife or something like that. And because of the way that the courthouse is set up, there isn't a secure path for staff to be able to get from the clerk's office to the courtroom to the second floor offices without passing through common areas. And that's something that's just going to be problematic. It's something that's not subject to an easy fix, but it's something that we're looking at, and I think it's going to be a little more long-term. There's also another long-term issue, and that's the computer software. It's something that's going to be a fairly large dollar item, and it's something that I don't think we want to move on too fast. We want to see what we can do, if we can tweak the existing system, if we can borrow or negotiate a price for a system that will better suit the needs that we have for ease of data entry and sharing of information. Those are a little bit more long-term. But in large part, many of these items have been met, and it's really been an effort of cooperation between the city attorney's office and the prosecutor, the city manager's office, the court administrator, and the court in dealing with many of these issues. One of the things that we did that came from a need, and the city manager's office found money to be able to do this, was to get a domestic violence probation officer. We'd been fortunate to have the assistance of the police department and be able to fill that function, but it certainly became apparent to the chief and to myself that we needed to move in a different direction. We were able to do that. We were able to get somebody who has done very well in that position in the first 2 or 3 months that she's been here, has developed systems to streamline the process to be more effective. We're seeing that that's the case. I'm very happy with what we've been able to do there, and I think that it speaks to the willingness of everybody to work together when a problem arises here. So, and I feel, although there's always some differences in opinion and differences in approach to dealing with issues that affect more than one party, I've really felt like that there's been a attitude of cooperation between the various parties to be able to achieve what needs to be done here. Change sometimes is slow when an organization is big and when an organization is been used to doing things with the status quo. But I've been pleasantly surprised with the ability to meet with people, and I found that the best thing that my management style, I got a book from the chief that she gave me. It was about Abraham Lincoln and his management style. And one of the things that Lincoln's well known for is this management by walking around. And that's just that you don't just sit in your office, but you go out and you talk to people face to face. And I find that that's much more effective than what I find is the nemesis of myself, which is sending things by email. It's always really easy. It gets there. And unfortunately, I think that that's probably counterproductive because you lose that face-to-face contact. I've made a point of going out to activities within the city, going over to the city center to talk with the city manager's office, HR, city attorney. I've gone to the police department. I've met with all of the officers at their roll call doing trainings along with the prosecutor and the assistant city attorney so they know my face and they can see me when I'm just not up on the bench and wearing the robe. And I think that's part of what I've wanted to do and what I've been able to do, and try to get that out, get an attitude of working together and being able to address issues. So I'm pleased that that's happened. Now, it's not perfect, and council may have had some information filtered through the grapevine. There are certain issues that come up, but I think that even when issues have come up, we've been able to deal with them and resolve them and be able to move forward, and I think that we're in a good place right now in regards to all of that. So I see that the progress that we've made has been significant. I think we're moving in the right direction, and I'm pleased at where we are right now. So if there's any other specific questions about anything that I've talked to or anything that I haven't, I'd be happy to discuss them.
Questions for the judge?
Hi, Jim. Last year, as we were going through the transition phase, there was a fair amount of discussion about the establishment of a bench book. And I know that you and Julie work very closely together, but as we're looking to have additional associate judges step in, do we have a bench book? What's the status of it? What's your feeling about where we're at right now?
We have a bench book, and it's actually not something that I created. It was actually something that Mr. Mathias put together in association with materials that we had. It was created and was in existence from sometime last summer, I think, that it first came in. There were copies. There's one that's in the courtroom. There's one the court administrator has, and there was one that was given to each of the judges. So we all have them. And we have updated them. For instance, one of the sections in there is about how the sessions are set up, and we've changed that and tweaked it, and I think made it a lot better so that it's easier for the public to come in and get their cases heard. It's more efficient. We just made another change towards our trial settings to try to accommodate the schedules of the prosecutor, the police officer that are on the graveyard shifts, the photo red light people, to be able to make that work a little bit better, and I think that we've been able to do that. It's just coming online now. And when we make changes like that, we make changes to the bench book so we can update those things, and that's something that the court administrator actually does. So we do have those books. I think it's partially a way to standardize procedures and partially a resource if something comes up that you just haven't dealt with in a while or maybe not at all that you can go to get some guidance for.
And so you're finding that the bench book is something that's working for you, and almost literally it's getting everyone on the same page?
That's about right.
Thank you.
Any other? Oh, Bruce.
Yeah, I was just going to, I think, just compliment you guys. I think essentially this is the type of review and information communication and transparency that's terrific as far as the confidence of council, staff, community, citizens, soup to nuts. So I think this is an excellent review in terms of what you guys are doing, how you're doing it, why you're doing it, what's going on, the interface in between the departments, so forth and so on. I'm just very complimentary regarding the effort. On a related note, I suppose I'm just wondering where you're going to put the ATM in the courthouse when, which I assume is coming soon.
That is a designated historic building.
See, there you go.
Well, to answer that, Councilmember Stallman, I'll tell you that a couple of years ago I had the opportunity and the privilege to be able to travel to China with my son, who was involved in Taekwondo at that point. It still is, has his black belt. And we were able to as one of the times that they were down, to visit Forbidden City, which is a great historic place, thousands of years old and huge. And as we wandered around and saw pagodas and little houses and halls to eat and all type of stuff, we turned one corner, we ran into a Starbucks in the middle of the Forbidden City with the full regalia, the green and the old the logo that I see in front of you. And as I was listening to the discussions about our Main Street and how you do that, I thought, it's clear to me that nobody in China had the same type of a thought, because that's the type of disruption of continuity that you wouldn't expect in something historic like that. Our courthouse, unfortunately, we're going to have to deal with some issues in regards to the appearance and setup of the courthouse and dealing with a security issue. And I think there's some things that can be done that will have minimal impact on that, with a maximum amount of safety and comfort for the staff. And that's something that I'll address. It's going to come with a number that's going to affect the budget, and I think that's something that we're looking at least making a proposal for in the next budget process.
That's good.
But it is something that we need to address, and
appreciate that.
Can fit into an ATM on it. We might be able to. That would obviously assist people in getting those fines paid.
Jim?
When I first looked at these numbers with the reduction that was there, my first thought was I'd like to think it is a compliment to our citizens that they are reducing the amount of so-called crime that we give them tickets for. And that could be part of it.
It could be. I've told people that if that number ever reached zero and I was out of a job for that reason, I'd be perfectly happy, because that would be a great place to live. Unfortunately, I've never seen it actually get down to that, but some of the reduction may well be, and some of these numbers may be indirectly affected by the photo red light system that we've had, and we're talking about augmenting, because although that does generate some revenue, I think the last information I saw was that we actually were in the red in terms of those, in terms of the numbers we had anticipated. But we've also generated a little bit more caution around some of those intersections, and talks that I've had with the chief. The number of accidents are down at those intersections, and that's something that we would rather all see. I mean, I don't need to see an increase in the revenue generated if we can see reduction in the accidents, injury to property and to persons in the city.
Well, Denver, there was an article in the Post a couple months ago about Denver's citations being down also. So it may be just a cycle that's happening across the metro area.
But we're seeing that in Aurora as well. I also sit out there, and Aurora is pleased enough with what's happened there. They're doing something similar to what we're doing here, which is looking at additional intersections based on the reduction of accidents to go down to the next tier of accident intersections and see if they can affect those numbers at that place. So it certainly is having an effect, and a positive effect in terms of the safety of the city.
Well, I think another contributing factor that at least I've read has been on the price of gas, fuel.
Well, there are a lot of factors that feed in. I don't know if there's any one controlling, but I'm just glad to see the trend. Not the gas price trend, but the reduction.
Yeah. From my perspective, Jim, certainly thank you for bringing the information to us, and encourage the continuing dialogue, and tee us up for the sticker shock, I guess.
One thing I did want to ask Council, I could make a quarterly report in person like I'm doing now. Part of the reason I was kind of anticipating doing this in April as opposed to May, although it's only early May now. And obviously you're very busy, and your time is taken up with a lot of different things. I would still like to at least meet with Council at such a rate as Council would like, but I can also do the quarterly report on paper to Council if you would like, and then maybe reduce the number of face-to-face time unless you want to see me every 3 months, and I'm happy to do so if you do.
I want to see you. I don't know about the rest of you guys.
I think having it done in a public forum where we've got an opportunity for the citizens to watch it, I think is important. So
I agree.
May make more sense to do it at a study session as opposed to the.
Yeah, I was going to say, now you know how it feels when someone's
As
the
much
judge.
fun as that is.
I agree with Deb that a study session may be a better venue.
I'll just try to schedule that a little bit better. Maybe I'd like to do it right after I get the quarterly figures. It's kind of easiest to talk about that if it's not too far removed. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. I think we need to take a 10-minute break.
Okay.
They are on. Okay, we're back in session. Reports.
Yes, Council, just a couple of revenue items to pass along to you. Suzanne and Mayor Clark did successfully attend the final sale of the Sternberg building last Thursday. I'm told that the mayor actually took a paper bag anticipating that the money, he'd get it in small bills in a paper bag. To his disappointment, the title company said no. They actually wired the money into our bank account.
I was very disappointed.
I know you were. I heard about it, and you just took your little flat paper bag and went home. So proceeds of that after closing cost $173,893.83. And that was credited on Thursday. Monday, I think I had advised you that we'd been advised by Denver Water that we thought that first payment on the water contract would come the first week of May, and yes, in fact, it did. The first $1 million payment under the contract was wired to the finance department yesterday. So that's a couple of bright spots on the revenue front. I know Kelly sent you an email, but just for the record, for people who are still watching us or may watch this on streaming video or whatever, the city's economic development program, our economic gardening program, has been selected as one of the top 25 innovative government programs in the country. This is a program run by the Ash Center at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and it's a national program. Actually, our application was solicited this year, which is a little bit unusual, but they contacted Mr. Gibbons and asked us to actually submit. There is a couple of next stages to this. They take these 25, and then that will be narrowed down to 5 finalists, I think sometime in September. The Harvard people may be out here. They may do a site visit sometime this summer. I'm not clear about that. But they do go to 5 finalists, and then, as I recall, because we were actually a semifinalist in this program back in the 90s with gardening again, but at the winner, there is a cash prize at the end of the process, and I believe it's around $100,000. So pretty stiff competition, but I think very rewarding to the councils that have supported this program and the staff that's developed this over the years, and for that recognition. Finally, I did receive a notice of a retirement today. Police Commander Bruce Beckman has announced his retirement. He will retire effective May 20th. This will wrap up 37 years of service for Commander Beckman to Littleton PD. There will be a retirement ceremony for Commander Beckman June 1 at 3 p.m., and they will hold this up in the police training room. And if you've ever been to one of those retirement ceremonies, they're presented with their badge and some memorabilia of their
What time
careers.
is this?
Sorry?
3?
3 o'clock, yes, sir. June 1, 3 o'clock, and that's on a Wednesday. They typically do that because with the shift changes, it allows a larger number of working police officers to attend those. So anyway, long, distinguished career for Commander Beckman, and we'll wish him well when he retires, and we'll retire his badge on June 1, but his last day of duty will be May 20th. And that's it for tonight.
Council, tonight on the agenda, you had an executive session scheduled to discuss the downtown parking lease with Reinke Brothers, and Greg Reinke did call today and withdrew his lease from further consideration with the city. So we would like to pull that item from the agenda. That's all I have.
Jose?
Just a few items. The delegation got back from Australia, the Littleton Bega delegation, and one of them approached me and said, you know, what's wonderful down there in Bega is that the fact in all of the states, or all of the little cities, as you enter the town, it says, we are a sister city with such and such, when you go in town and go out of a town. So they was wondering whether or not we might be able to do that. And I said, oh, Charlie would be happy to do that. But it's hard to get signs out of him, so I'm going to ask him anyway. Town Hall Arts Center has held over Chicago 1 week. It was a very good program, and it's be nice for all you folks to see them down there. And that's about the gist of it right now.
Bruce. Was waiting to see if we were going to go chronologically.
Every other one.
Yeah, exactly. just in case anyone's interested, if we win that Harvard Prize, $100,000 divided by 7 is $14,285. So I know I'm rooting for it. The Fine Arts Committee, interesting meeting on the 21st of April. There's a subsequent email that Lorena Donahue sent out. The Conservation Solutions Group is working on the Stern Memorial Fountain at Stern Park. That's in process, and she says it's looking great. I haven't been over to see it.
Yes, it is.
Oh, you have? Yeah, okay. Yeah, excellent. The handful of issues, let me see. One of the items that came up at Fine Arts Committee is we didn't quite know what to do with it, but there is apparently a legislative bill, House Bill 1031, which gives authority to local governments to form creative districts authorized to accept economic development incentives and assistance from the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, so forth and so on.
This year, that's pending?
Theoretically.
Okay.
I think Carol Brejak was going to go try to dig up some information on it. I don't know if you guys have gotten any visibility to it.
We'll check on it.
Yeah,
CML.
I don't know that there's any money that the Office of Economic Development has to bestow upon one of these things, but...
Well, Norm, yeah, that's...
House Bill 1034 is what you said?
1031. Yeah. So I thought I'd bring that up. I thought it was interesting. I mean, we all did. The, let's see, May 27, 28, I think that's the date's in process, the dedication of the Cobbler's Bench installation in La Rocca Park. Apparently this has now been communicated to the La Rocca family and is out there in the public domain, so we are free to let people know that the next installation, there was a piece commissioned, it's absolutely a fabulous piece, was commissioned a year ago and is pretty much done and is going to be installed. They need to put the concrete base in, but I think the end of May, assuming the weather cooperates, will be installed in La Rocca Park, which is on Windermere, just a bit north of Littleton Boulevard. So that should be a lot of fun.
Did they shift the Caterpillar?
The Caterpillar is still in, it's not yet. As I understand it, they're still pointing towards Stern Park, but they were waiting for South Suburban to confirm a location within Stern Park, and there was, I think, a request to go back to South Suburban and sort of move the ball down the field, as it were, in terms of locating a specific site.
Just kind of crawling along.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, actually, given the topic. Yeah.
No legs.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. That is just, no, good. We are likely to inherit a new piece of art. It's actually called Literary Catch. It's the statue, the bronze statue in Kettering Lake, the boy sitting with a book and theoretically a fishing pole on the rock. That's technically not in the city's collection, but nobody's entirely sure who exactly owns it, or outside of possession being 9/10 of the law and it being in Kettering Park. It may belong to South Suburban. It may theoretically belong to Aberdeen Village, but I doubt that very seriously, because as a homeowners association, we don't have a lot of money. And
that's why you spend it all on that.
Potentially. Well, it's the proximity to Vaughn Gardner's house is suspicious, of course. But nonetheless, that they're trying to get a hold of the artist to figure out if she can shed any light on this. The annual conservation efforts are starting, and let me see here. Oh, there was a question. This was another question, and I apologize for this being sort of long. they actually had a lot of good ideas, not that they normally don't, but this one more so than usual. There was a question having to do with new development and the concept of, given that we have a lot of money for open space, I think the code basically says if you are a new development a la Aspen Alta Grove, you have to pay so much money, dedicate so much acreage for open space, or pay a fee to acquire open space, or so forth and so on, and I can't remember.
Residential, yes.
Yes, if it's a residential. And the question, committee's question was, well, what happens if they were given the alternative, instead of buying open space, they could commit it to art acquisition as a suitable community investment kind of thing, which I thought was a creative solution given to their budget situation relative to how much money.
If you want, you can ask Suzanne to look. I think the code calls out specifically
It does.
parkland.
Yeah, I think it does. So the question, it would I told them it would likely have to be an ordinance change. I have no idea if, I assume it's something we could do, but I thought I'd bring it up, maybe ask for an inquiry and see if it's something anybody wants to move forward with.
The City County of Denver actually has a provision for any construction, I forget this percentage, will have so much that has to be set aside for art.
That's for public projects.
Yeah, it's public.
Yes, sir. But I think Suzanne would probably want to think a little bit about looking at the nexus. The parkland fee is, I think, supposedly to be almost a mitigation factor if they're not going to have other open space. So my guess is Suzanne's going to want to, either she or Kirsten's going to want to, if the council's interested in that, maybe do a little research. So just
you can contact Jim Collins. The cash in lieu program, South Suburban's dealt with that.
For art?
Art? Well, not for art, but
that's the distinction I'm making. I mean, so anyway.
Personally, I think it's, subject to 4 votes, I think it's creative, and to the extent it's something the city would be interested, to the extent it'd be something we'd be interested in doing. We clearly have open space money available. We have far less available for this kind of thing. If it's something that's of value, it might be worth looking at. So
I guess my opinion is that if we had a lot of room to grow and had a lot of development going to come forth, that might be a program to go, because I know there are cities around who do a percentage of whatever the value is has to be dedicated to some kind of public art. Right. But I'm not sure that would benefit us all that much here in Littleton, because we don't have that much space to try to grow.
I'm thinking Marathon. That could be a pretty substantial project, so it could sort of fund them for some period of time. But yeah, I understand it could be bits and pieces kind of thing.
Well, that's assuming that Marathon doesn't dedicate the property that's required, because it's either
fair point
property or that.
Yeah.
I guess my inclination is I don't think that we're well served by having a budget where we have dedicated revenue streams that we can only spend on one particular item. And I realize that this is in that category, but creating more categories, I think, is the wrong way to go, rather than freeing the money up.
Okay. All right.
So,
moving on. Attended the Fire Protection Board meeting on the 25th. The chief indicated they'd reorganize 3 staff positions to field positions. And I think it was Chief Glanville, and there were 2 others that were created as safety and medical officers to facilitate training on a shift basis. And then there was an issue with some water line problems at Station 13, which isn't technically, is that technically in the city? It's the one down at.
It is not.
It's just outside.
Yeah, but they're still working that. They do have an issue out there. With
and they can't quite figure out what it is, or they couldn't and their neighbors aren't having it, so it's an odd situation with some foreign material in the water system.
Before you move on from the fire board, that you just triggered my thought, I'd forgotten to pass on to you. Late last week, Suzanne did get a proposed amended contract. It will be, a copy of it will be in your packets this Thursday. We anticipate asking you for an executive session at next week's study session, mainly just to discuss process. We're not going to have a chance for probably a few weeks to completely analyze it from the staff point of view. We've kind of started that, but for example, the finance department, Tiffany's still very swamped with the 2010 audit. So it'll take a little time, but we will at least get it to you so you'll have it in your hands. You can start to look at it, but I think it'll be several weeks before we can do a complete analysis of what the changes are from the existing 2000 contract. But we did want to advise you that we have received it. You will get copies in your Thursday packets, and then next week we'll just talk a little bit about process and structure of the negotiations. So,
okay.
Anyway.
Perfect. Thank you. The ever-popular, often imitated, never duplicated merchant plug of the week was going to be Wingman this week, but probably don't need to do that. So instead, we'll sub in Home Depot because they were very...
They cook good food.
Oh, God. We do need a security system.
Yeah, maybe so. In all honesty, wanted to give major kudos to Home Depot, who really did a terrific job for us on the Epic Spring Cleaning event. Herb Scott, the store manager, was out there at 7:30 helping us maneuver around the 53-foot trailer and had a fabulous turnout. We ended up filling the 53-foot trailer somewhere between probably a third and a half full, and then we had a 28-foot truck that we got about 3/4 full in terms of hard goods and couches and furniture and so forth and so on. All totaled, we estimate about 10,000 pounds of donations collected. By comparison, we maybe did 3,500 last year, and Arc Thrift does a weekend event we've been running for several years up in Broomfield. It's very well established community-wide, and last week we did, I think, between 11 and 12,000. So as far as the second annual event, the volumetric was absolutely fabulous. And as a result of all that, we're going to send a $5,000 check over to Interfaith for purposes of helping replenish their food pantry. So really outstanding, but had a great event. And Home Depot, they told me they definitely saw an impact on foot traffic or customer traffic as a result of the whole thing. So kudos to Home Depot for their participation and support. That's it.
I take it the impact was positive.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, a positive impact, I meant to say. Thank you.
Deb.
Just a couple of things on Museum Board. We elected new officers. Kim Fields was reelected as chair. And Ginny Frazier has had to resign the board because she's moved out of Littleton. The board decided that they were not going to approach council to fill that position at this point. They don't feel that that's a shortage. They have now 6 members, and they thought that that would be okay. They'll be able to meet their quorums. And if it does run into a problem for them at all, then certainly they'll let us know, and then we'll have to take action as we need to. But we had an interesting discussion in that now that Mr. Nims is splitting himself between 2 facilities, he has 2 boards. So he's got the library board and the museum board. So he thinks we should all get together. So he wants and he talked to the library board about it, and then he talked to us about it on Monday, and looking at having a couple of joint meetings where the library board comes over and gets a tour of the museum and kind of hears what the museum board does, and then vice versa with the library. So that's in the works. It looks like it'll be a late summer, early fall thing. So
Is that like setting up a play group?
I'm done.
Okay. Jim.
Sorry. Why do you even talk?
Well, I attended an energy efficiency workshop, which was kind of centered around on what communities are doing by identifying the best uses of limited resources, and then we had some case studies to illustrate some of the things that they were talking about in this. The E470 Highway Authority is studying speed limits. Statistics has shown that 85% of the travelers are between 75 and 76 or below when the speed limit is 70. And then the board adopted a toll evasion and administrative adjudication rules, trying to collect more of the tolls of people who are trying to evade paying. And we heard several staff reports. The South Suburban Park Foundation approved communication plans, promotion plans, and marketing schedules, had reports on several of the trail projects that's going on that's being constructed, and they hope to start soon on the east side of the Mary Carter Trail from Prince going northward to Big Dry Creek. That has to be finished, I think, by October for the GOCO grant, I think, that was given through the working group. We did hear about some parking issues in the apartments along Bellevue with people who are parking there and then attending park functions. It is signed for removal, but they're getting a little more irritated as summer comes along about people taking up parking spaces that the residents then can't pull in to park in their parking lot. So the police department may start getting more calls about that. Transit Alliance is meeting on Wednesday, the 18th of May from 6 to 9. I am involved in a Dr. Cog meeting that night, not able to attend, but if anybody wants to, there's a $20 charge. It's going to be a workshop on transit advocacy. May is the Archaeology and Historic Preservation Month, and there's lots of activities around that people can check on if they're interested in participating. The video lottery bill is still alive, which is allowing gambling to be authorized by the state legislature and not being approved by the voters of the state. It's scheduled for a committee hearing tomorrow afternoon. Have no idea which way it is leaning. I did talk to one of the senators that's in the meeting and was assured that it would not get past the Senate committee, but you never know. I was going to bring with me tonight a catalog of that I received that had flatbed carts in it that had rubber-tired wheels to try to alleviate some of the sound we get of the custodial staff going back and forth. But then I noticed tonight that one of the custodians going by with a mop bucket and couldn't hear anything. So I don't know if the problem got solved or not. But I've
Under
got the
threat
catalog.
of homicide from Councilwoman Brinkman, those have been swapped out and have been customized into rubber wheels.
So I don't need to bring my catalog and give it to somebody?
No, sir. Well, you could. You could still bring a catalog, give it to Debbie.
I could do
Thank
that.
you.
And the last thing I want to mention is that I've had a couple of brief conversations with Mayor Clark about me running for the Colorado Municipal League Executive Board at the June conference, and that will have to come before this council for endorsement at the next meeting if we move forward, and I'll make that decision within the next day or two.
Bill?
Yes. Historic Preservation Board, as you might imagine, in addition to the discussion of the appeal, did talk about their strategic plan, True Grit, and adopted that, as well as continuing to review the list of merit activity. And there's been a lot of interesting information that's been brought to the group through an intern, and some of that information is being shared with the Planning Commission. South Metro Denver Chamber of Commerce this afternoon had their Small Business Leadership Awards celebration And past winners of Small Business of the Year included folks like Designs by Sundown and South Denver Cardiology, as well as Community Leader Awards like Mary Bradford and Daryl Schulte. I was able to attend through the Community Leader Award, and this year it was Gail Dendinger, if I can say it correctly, who's been very active, particularly taking books and literary items, and as well as coats into Eastern Europe, books into Africa, and the like. And so was a touching moment hearing his award. The Legislative Action Committee has been briefed by the lack of the precise crayons by the state legislature on redistricting. So it's been an interesting discussion to watch, with some of the committee members actually having given their own personal views on how things are going. So that's been pretty interesting. And do we participate in the state's unemployment insurance pool?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And there is a bill dealing with the adjustment, the actuarial formulas for the rate making, as well as experience rating that's going to occur. And if someone hasn't taken a look at that, even folks that are pretty close to their own calculations as business owners have really kind of a mixed response to that. And so, but one of the things, it's like a number of issues, status quo is not acceptable going forward. So the Economic Development Group has received the quarterly commercial real estate report, and I need to get that to the city staff, so be in a position to remind me on that. And at the award ceremony today, Greg Lopez, who's the Colorado District Director for the U.S. Small Business Administration, it's just to say South Metro area is a great place to have a small business and get support. Not only do they have our award-winning BIA activity, but the Small Business Development Center of the South Metro Denver chapter that's here received the top award from the Small Business Administration for the centers, and it was a pretty big deal that they made out of that, because it involved, just as our economic gardening will go through a number of reviews. It was first proposed at the state level, then it went to the region level, which is kind of the Rocky Mountain region, before it went into the national pool. So significant awards for folks that are supporting small businesses in our community. South Suburban Park and Rec District Board met. They have and expressed an interest in our bike ped master plan development, as well as the safety around the trails crossings, because they feel some certainly affinity to that. There was a long discussion that they had, and certainly as folks like the Highline working group take a look at Broadway crossings, the City of Lone Tree is looking at how do you get across Lincoln Avenue, and the fact that there's really not a bike crossing, whether you're taking a look at Lone Tree, whether you're taking a look at Highlands Ranch, there's really not a way until you get over to the trail that parallels I-25 that starts to have some impact. So, and another discussion going forward, and I'm not sure where the cities are exactly, but a fair amount of discussion with if the issue, as far as the tax that provides the shareback funds from Arapahoe County goes forward for a re-up, is taking a look at some adjustments in the formulas and how the money gets back out into the community. I know I've been in discussion with Dennis so that he could share information with Glenn, who will be here by the next regular meeting, regarding being a center for planning, and that there's a webinar that Dr. Cog has on May 16th, and we're going to have that information out. as folks have been around town and they've enjoyed the crab trees, certainly thanks to Troop 361 for getting out there and putting some of those crab trees out. And reminder to our city manager and our city finance director, wherever he may be this evening, May 15th is coming up.
I figured it would. I have it on my calendar.
Good. Thank you.
Peggy?
Two things. I had the opportunity and pleasure, and my muscles enjoyed it too, helping students and city staff plant trees at Euclid and Goddard Elementary Schools on the 21st and 22nd. The kids and staff all did a great job, and the trees, of course, will help with the air quality and help beautify the city even more and make us an even more attractive place to live. And the trees, I think there are about 20 to 25 trees at each school, and they're part of the former Mayor Hickenlooper's tree campaign, and we got them as part of a grant. So this was a wonderful project. Then last Friday, I visited the Arapahoe County Mental Health Court along with Chris Gibbons and Kay Wilmisher and a couple other people from Greater Littleton Youth Initiative. The mental health court is a fairly new idea in Colorado, or implementation in some places in Colorado, but in some other states they've existed for a while, and they're looking to be some very effective, cost-effective and otherwise effective alternatives to sending people to jail. So really interesting thing. We've heard about this from one of the people at GLYI, about 3-4 months ago, Jose? But anyway, so several of us expressed interest in going out to see how the court operated. So very interesting. Thank you.
I'd like to suggest that we put on the study session topic for next week, parking for postal employees.
What's that?
Parking for postal.
Parking for postal employees.
Oh.
Since we're probably not going to get the lease done on the building.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that, Doug. I'm sorry.
Do you,
alternatives
is it your
for-
intent to have staff, is this something for council, or you want to talk about?
Have council come, have staff bring us some alternatives. I mean, the one I can think of is hang tags for the postal
Oh, I
employees.
see, in terms of parking on the street and some sort
Yeah.
of
Or if
permit
you've got
system.
another
Oh, okay.
alternative for
All right.
where to park them.
You will have also, you're going to review your search firm RFPs next week. The HPB board has requested some time to talk about they don't have a clear process to annex properties into the historic district, and they wanted to talk about some code changes, amendments to the ordinance. So we can add this, and then we will have a brief executive session just to discuss the proposed fire contract with you.
And we have the Humane Society.
That's actually been dropped, and it's because
They were looking at trying to acquire the building they were in, and that has now gone under contract with another buyer who's looking at using them as a long-term tenant, but the need for them to come talk about that property right away is not pressing.
Okay. Jim?
Dr. Cog, Administrative Committee had a briefing on security. We now have an armed guard at our meetings after some members of staff got some threats. The Board of Directors approved delays in the quick implementation projects in the current Transportation Improvement Plan. We heard about legislation, as we do during the session all the time, had presentation on the twin tunnels by Idaho Springs and what the alternatives for solving that bottleneck might be, and 5 standing committees made reports.
All right, Deb.
Council, I will read orders to go into exec session. After we have voted on that, I will then announce the members of staff that would join us for that session. I move that the City Council convene an exec session pursuant to CRS Section 24-6-402, Paren 4, subsection F, for a personnel matter to discuss the open associate judge position, and CRS 24-6-402, Paren 4, Paren B, to confer with our attorney for the city for the purposes of receiving legal advice on litigation regarding Canamart.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to go in executive session for those 2 items. Discussion. This takes 5 votes.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion's approved.
All right, we will not be conducting business when we get back. Deb, do you want to list who's coming in?
City Manager Jim Wood, City Attorney Suzanne, and Deputy City Manager Phil Cortese.
Okay.
And I guess us.